He thought bringing a homeless woman to his ex's wedding would be his revenge. He didn't know she'd be his salvation. Before we dive into this emotional journey, if you're enjoying these stories of unexpected love and redemption, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that might just change how you see the world. Now, let's begin. The invitation sat on Daniel Pierce's glass desk like an accusation. Mr. Daniel Pierce and guest. He'd received it 3 weeks ago, and for 3 weeks it had remained exactly there, unopened, untouched, burning a hole through his carefully constructed composure. The embossed gold lettering caught the late afternoon sun slanting through his penthouse windows, making it shimmer like something precious. Like something that mattered. Vanessa was getting married. Not to him. Never to him. To Marcus fucking Chun. Daniel reached for the crystal tumbler on his desk, fingers wrapping around the cut glass with practiced precision. The whiskey inside was 25 years old, older than some of his employees, and it tasted like absolutely nothing. Everything tasted like nothing lately. He didn't drink it, just held it, feeling the weight, the cold, the sharp edges pressing into his palm. His phone sat silent beside the invitation. 12 missed calls from his mother this week alone, each one a variation of the same question. Are you going? You shouldn't go. You should definitely go. Show her what she's missing. Don't give her the satisfaction. He'd stopped answering after call number 3. The New York skyline stretched beyond his windows, steel and glass and 1,000 lit windows where other people were living other lives. From 60 stories up, the world looked manageable. Orderly. Small. Daniel had built his empire on being above it all, untouchable in his corner office, his penthouse, his carefully curated existence where every surface was pristine and every relationship was transactional. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd never felt smaller. His reflection stared back at him from the darkening window, 34 years old, 6 feet of expensive suits and deliberate control. His face gave nothing away. He'd perfected that skill during the 16 months since Vanessa had walked out of his life, taking his business partner, his proposed merger, and every ounce of faith he'd had in love with her. You're married to your work, Daniel, she'd said, standing in this very room, her engagement ring, his grandmother's ring, sitting on this very desk. Marcus sees me. He's present. You're just, here. Present. The word had haunted him for 16 months. Daniel set down the untouched whiskey and picked up the invitation, finally opening it. Thick cardstock, elegant calligraphy, venue in the Hamptons. Of course. Vanessa had always wanted a destination wedding. He'd been too busy closing a deal in Singapore to discuss venues. Too busy. Always too busy. What do you think? The question appeared in his mind in her voice, and he realized with a sick twist that he couldn't remember what he'd answered. He'd probably said, whatever you want, I trust your judgment, which was code for I'm not paying attention. The invitation included a handwritten note at the bottom. Daniel, I hope you can celebrate with us. It would mean a lot. Mean a lot. He laughed, a sharp sound in the silent penthouse, and felt something crack in his chest. His assistant had asked him last week, casually, if he'd be attending. You're not seriously considering going, are you, Mr. Pierce? He should have said no. He should have thrown the invitation away, sent a tasteful gift, moved on like a rational adult who'd accepted that sometimes love ends and life continues. Instead he'd said, of course I'm going, and watched Melissa's face do that thing where she tried very hard not to have an opinion. Now, standing in his pristine penthouse with the city glittering below and the invitation mocking him from his desk, Daniel Pierce, CEO of Pierce Innovations, Forbes 30 under 30, self-made millionaire, admitted the truth to himself. He had absolutely no idea why he was going. Revenge? Closure? Some masochistic need to watch the woman he'd loved pledge herself to someone else? All he knew was he couldn't not go. Couldn't give Vanessa the satisfaction of his absence. Couldn't admit that it still mattered, couldn't. His phone buzzed. Another text from his mother. If you're going, at least bring someone. Don't show up alone like some pathetic. He didn't read the rest. Bring someone. Right. Because that's what you did at weddings. You brought a date, smiled for photos, pretended everything was fine while your ex-fiancée married your former friend. Daniel grabbed his coat. The penthouse was suffocating him, the silence pressing against his skull. He needed air. Needed to move. Needed to not be alone with his thoughts for one goddamn minute. The elevator carried him down 60 floors in smooth, silent descent, a glass and steel coffin delivering him back to the world. Meanwhile, across the city, Grace Holloway was invisible. Not metaphorically, though that was also true. Literally invisible in the way that homeless people become invisible, existing in the negative space of other people's averted eyes, their quickened steps, their sudden fascination with their phones. She sat on a cold concrete step outside the closed Carnegie Deli on 7th Avenue, her back pressed against a brick wall that had memorized the shape of her spine. The violin case beside her was closed. It had been closed for 8 months, 2 weeks, and 5 days. Not that she was counting. The evening rush poured past her in rivers of expensive coats and purposeful strides, people going home, going to dinner, going to lives that still made sense. Grace pulled her thin jacket tighter and tried to remember what it felt like to be one of them. The cold was the worst part. It never left, even when the weather warmed. It had worked its way into her bones that first winter on the streets, settling in her joints, her chest, the spaces between her thoughts. Some mornings she woke up and couldn't remember if she'd ever been warm. A woman in a camel coat stepped over Grace's outstretched legs without breaking stride, phone pressed to her ear, and then I told him if he can't commit to couples therapy, I'm done. I mean, honestly, how hard is it to just show up? Grace closed her eyes. Show up. She'd shown up to every doctor's appointment, every school meeting, every recital. She'd shown up to the hospital room where her daughter died. She'd shown up to the funeral where 6-year-olds aren't supposed to be buried. She'd shown up to every single day after, until the days became unbearable and showing up meant pouring wine at 10 in the morning and missing orchestra rehearsals and finally, inevitably, losing everything else she had left. The violin case sat beside her like a gravestone. Her fingers were too cold to play anyway. That's what she told herself. The truth was more complicated, buried somewhere beneath the grief and shame and the simple fact that music had been Lily's favorite thing in the world, and playing it now felt like desecration. Ma'am. Grace didn't open her eyes. People rarely addressed her directly. Usually it was security guards asking her to move, or occasionally someone dropping change in her cup without looking at her face. Ma'am, I'm sorry to bother you. The voice was male, educated, and close. Too close. Grace's eyes snapped open, instinct overriding exhaustion. You learned quickly on the streets that close proximity meant danger. But the man standing before her didn't look dangerous. He looked expensive, charcoal wool coat, Italian leather shoes, face that belonged in a boardroom or a cologne ad. Dark hair, sharp jawline, eyes that were doing something strange. They were actually looking at her. Not through her, not past her. At her. I have. He started, then stopped. His jaw worked like he was chewing on words that didn't fit in his mouth. This is going to sound insane. Grace said nothing. She'd learned that silence was safest. The man glanced up and down the street, and Grace saw something in his face she recognized because she'd seen it in her own mirror, back when she had mirrors, desperation trying to dress itself up as something else. I have a proposition, he said finally. A business proposition. Grace's hand moved instinctively to her jacket pocket where she kept the small knife. Not much, but something. The man saw the movement and actually stepped back, palms raised. No. God, no. I'm not, he ran a hand through his hair, and it was such a human gesture, so at odds with his expensive perfection, that Grace felt something flicker in her chest. Curiosity, maybe. Or just the muscle memory of what it felt like to be surprised. I need someone to accompany me to a wedding, he said, the words coming out in a rush. This Saturday. In the Hamptons. It's my ex-fiancée's wedding, and I need to bring someone, and I know how this sounds, I know exactly how this sounds, but I will pay you. Seriously pay you. $5,000 for one evening. The number hung in the cold air between them like something obscene. Grace stared at him. $5,000. $5,000 was first month, last month, and security deposit. $5,000 was a motel room for 3 months. $5,000 was the distance between the street and a roof. It was also too good to be true, which meant it was definitely too good to be true. Why? Her voice came out rougher than she expected, a creak from disuse. Because, he stopped. Started again. Because I'm pathetic. Because I can't show up alone. Because my mother won't stop calling. Because. His voice dropped, and for a moment, the expensive facade cracked. Because maybe if I walk in there with someone, anyone, I'll finally stop feeling like the biggest fool in New York. The honesty of it struck Grace somewhere deep, in a place she'd thought had gone numb. $5,000, she repeated. Yes. To attend a wedding. Yes. As your date. As my guest, he corrected. You wouldn't have to do anything except show up, stay for a few hours, and leave. That's it. I know it's unconventional. I know you don't know me. But I'm not, I wouldn't, he pulled out his phone, showing her the screen. A LinkedIn profile, Daniel Pierce, CEO, Pierce Innovations. I'm a real person. This is a real offer. And I'm clearly having some kind of breakdown, but I promise you'd be safe. Grace studied his face. Studied the desperation there, the pride barely holding together, the same broken thing she saw in her own reflection in store windows. What happens when two broken people make a deal with the devil, or with each other? Have you ever made a choice out of sheer desperation that changed your life? Drop your story in the comments. She should say no. Every survival instinct she'd honed over the past 2 years screamed to walk away from strange men with strange offers and money that felt like bait. But $5,000. And something else. Something in his eyes that looked like drowning, and Grace knew about drowning, knew it intimately, and maybe it was foolish or reckless or both, but $5,000, she said. Cash. Half up front. Daniel Pierce blinked at her. Then slowly, incredibly, he smiled. It was a sad smile, broken at the edges, but real. Deal, he said, and extended his hand. Grace looked at his hand for a long moment, clean manicured, everything hers wasn't. Then she reached out and shook it, her cold fingers wrapped in his warm ones, sealing a bargain neither of them fully understood. The city rushed past them, indifferent and glittering. Neither of them knew they just made the most important deal of their lives. The ride to Daniel's penthouse was silent except for the hum of the Tesla's electric engine and the sound of Grace's shallow breathing. She sat pressed against the passenger door, her violin case clutched to her chest like a shield, watching the city transform from gritty downtown streets to the polished glass towers of the financial district. The leather seat beneath her felt obscenely soft. She couldn't remember the last time she'd sat on anything that wasn't concrete or cardboard. Daniel kept his eyes on the road, hands at 10 and 2, posture rigid. Now that the impulsive offer had been made and accepted, reality was settling in with uncomfortable weight. What the hell was he doing? He just picked up a homeless woman off the street and invited her to his home. To his ex-fiancée's wedding. To pretend to be, what? Someone who mattered to him? The absurdity of it would have been funny if his chest didn't feel like it was being crushed in a vice. I'll need you to sign an NDA, he said, breaking the silence. His voice came out harder than he intended, defaulting to boardroom mode because that's what he did when he felt out of control. Non-disclosure agreement. Standard procedure. And we'll need to go over the details, how we met, what you do, basic background so the story holds up. Grace didn't respond. She was staring out the window at her own ghostly reflection, and Daniel caught himself wondering what she was thinking. What series of disasters had led her to that street corner? Whether she had family somewhere, people who missed her. Whether she thought he was insane or dangerous or both. I'm not dangerous, he said suddenly, and winced at how defensive it sounded. I know how this looks. Strange man, strange offer. But I'm not, I wouldn't hurt you. This is just. He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence because he didn't actually know what this was. Revenge. Grace said softly. Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. What? Against your ex. Grace turned to look at him, and her eyes were sharper than he expected, clear and assessing. You want to walk into her wedding with someone unexpected. Someone who'll make her wonder. Make her question her choice. The accuracy of it stung. Maybe, Daniel admitted. Then more honestly, yes. Grace nodded slowly, and something that might have been understanding flickered across her face. At least you're honest about it. Would you have said no if I wasn't? No. She looked back out the window. $5,000 buys a lot of honesty. The penthouse lobby was all marble and minimalist luxury, the kind of space designed to make people feel small and impressed simultaneously. The night doorman, Robert, looked up from his desk and did a double-take when he saw Daniel enter with Grace. Daniel felt the judgment in that look, the surprise, the thousand questions. He met Robert's eyes with a flat stare that said don't and guided Grace toward the elevator with a hand that didn't quite touch her back. The elevator ride was 60 floors of excruciating silence. Grace watched the numbers climb, her reflection multiplying in the mirrored walls, dozens of versions of herself, all looking lost and out of place. Daniel watched her watching herself, and felt something uncomfortable twist in his gut. Shame, maybe. Or the first whisper of regret. The penthouse doors opened directly into his living room. Grace stepped out slowly, and Daniel saw his home through her eyes, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, furniture that cost more than most people's cars, art on the walls that he'd bought because his decorator said it was investment pieces. Everything pristine, everything perfect, everything hollow. Jesus, Grace whispered. Daniel shrugged off his coat, suddenly exhausted. The guest room is down that hall. There's a bathroom attached. You can shower, sleep, whatever you need. We'll figure out the rest in the morning. Grace hadn't moved from the elevator threshold. She stood there, violin case still clutched to her chest, looking like she might bolt at any second. I need the money first, she said. Half up front. That was the deal. Right. The deal. Daniel walked to his office, a room off the main living area with a desk that cost $15,000 and a view he never looked at. He opened the safe hidden behind a Rothko print and pulled out a stack of cash he kept for emergencies. $2,500 in hundreds. He counted it twice, then returned to find Grace standing in exactly the same spot. He held out the money. Grace stared at it like it might disappear if she blinked. Then slowly, she reached out and took it. Her hands were shaking. Thank you, she said, and her voice cracked on the words. Daniel nodded, uncomfortable with her gratitude, with the weight of what this money clearly meant to her. The wedding is Saturday. That gives us 4 days. Tomorrow we'll go over the details, get you something to wear. Tonight, just rest. Grace looked down at the cash in her hands, and Daniel saw her throat work as she swallowed hard. When she looked back up, her eyes were wet. Why did you pick me? She asked. Out of everyone on that street, everyone in this city, why me? It was a good question. Daniel didn't have a good answer. I don't know, he said honestly. You were there. You looked. He paused, searching for the right word and finding only truth. You looked like you understood. Understood what? What it feels like to be invisible. The words hung between them, raw and unintended. Daniel hadn't meant to say that, hadn't meant to reveal anything real. But Grace's expression shifted, surprise, recognition, something that looked almost like compassion, and he knew she'd heard what he really meant. I'm invisible too. Despite all of this. Grace nodded slowly. The guest room is down that hall. Second door on the left. She moved past him, and Daniel caught the smell of the street on her clothes, cold air and concrete and something that made his chest tight. At the hallway entrance, she paused. Daniel. It was the first time she'd used his name. Yeah, this wedding. She turned to face him, and her expression was careful, guarded. Your ex-fiancée. You still love her? The question landed like a punch. Daniel opened his mouth to say no, to laugh it off, to deflect with some cutting remark about how love was a lie people told themselves to avoid dying alone. But Grace was looking at him with those clear, knowing eyes, and he found he couldn't lie to her. I don't know, he said. I loved who I thought she was. Or maybe I loved the idea of not being alone. I don't know if I've ever actually known the difference. Grace studied him for a long moment. Then she said quietly, the worst part isn't losing someone. It's realizing you might never have really had them at all. And before Daniel could respond, before he could ask if she was talking about his loss or her own, she disappeared down the hallway. The guest room door clicked shut. Daniel stood alone in his living room, surrounded by expensive things and empty space, and felt the weight of his impulsive decision settle fully onto his shoulders. What the hell had he done? Meanwhile, in the guest room, Grace locked the door and leaned against it, her whole body trembling. The room was larger than the last apartment she'd rented. Larger than some shelters she'd stayed in. The bed looked impossibly clean, impossibly soft, and for a moment she was terrified to touch anything with her street-dirty hands. $2,500 sat in her jacket pocket. $2,500 and 4 days until she had to perform the strangest role of her life, pretending to be someone a man like Daniel Pierce would choose. Someone visible. Someone who mattered. Grace set down her violin case and caught sight of herself in the full-length mirror on the closet door. She looked like exactly what she was, a ghost. Thin face, hollow cheeks, hair that hadn't been properly washed in weeks. Her clothes hung off her frame, stained and worn. Her hands were cracked and raw from the cold. You looked like you understood. Grace touched her reflection, and the woman in the mirror touched back. She understood too much. Understood what it meant to lose everything. Understood how easily the life you built could collapse. Understood that invisibility wasn't always about being homeless. Sometimes the loneliest people lived in penthouses 60 floors above the world. Daniel Pierce with his expensive suit and desperate eyes was just as lost as she was. Maybe more. The bathroom attached to the guest room was obscene, marble and glass and fixtures that probably cost more than her college tuition. Grace ran the water until it steamed, then stood under the shower spray for 20 minutes, watching 2 years of street grime circle the drain. She used the expensive shampoo that smelled like something called Mediterranean fig, and wondered if figs even had a smell. She scrubbed her skin until it was pink and raw and finally clean. When she emerged, wrapped in a towel that felt like clouds, her reflection looked different. Not better, exactly. But more like someone. More like Grace Holloway, who'd once performed at Carnegie Hall. Less like the invisible woman on the corner. The money sat on the bathroom counter where she'd placed it, neat hundreds in a stack. Grace picked up one bill and held it to the light, checking if it was real. It was. They all were. This was really happening. In 4 days, she would walk into a world she'd fallen out of, a world of wealth and weddings and people who mattered, on the arm of a man using her as a shield against his own pain. She should feel used. Should feel angry at being reduced to a prop in someone else's revenge fantasy. But all Grace felt was tired. Tired, and for the first time in 2 years, something that might have been hope. Maybe Daniel Pierce was using her. But she was using him too, using his money, his resources, his desperate need for her presence. It was transactional, honest in its dishonesty. And maybe, just maybe, for one night she could pretend to be someone who belonged in rooms like these again. Someone visible. Someone who hadn't lost everything that mattered. Grace pulled on the clean pajamas someone, Daniel? A housekeeper, had left folded on the bed. They were too big, men's clothes probably, but they were soft and warm and smelled like lavender detergent. She crawled into the massive bed, and the sheets felt like a luxury she'd forgotten existed. Through the wall, she could hear movement, Daniel in his own room, pacing from the sound of it. Restless. Unable to settle. 2 broken people under one roof, bound by a strange bargain and the shared understanding of what it meant to be alone in a crowded world. Grace closed her eyes and for the first time in months, felt something other than fear about tomorrow. It might have been curiosity. It might have been the dangerous, fragile thing people called possibility. The next morning, Daniel woke to the smell of coffee and the surreal realization that there was another person in his penthouse. He found Grace in the kitchen, her hair still damp from a shower, wearing the pajamas he'd left out and looking both vulnerable and defiant as she stood at his espresso machine like she was trying to decode alien technology. I couldn't figure out how to work this, she admitted, not looking at him. I just wanted coffee, but apparently that requires an engineering degree now. Daniel moved past her and pulled 2 mugs from the cabinet. It's unnecessarily complicated. My ex picked it out. Said it made artisanal coffee. He pressed buttons with practiced efficiency, and the machine whirred to life. I think she just liked expensive things. And you kept it after she left? I keep everything, Daniel said. Then, realizing how pathetic that sounded, I worked too much to bother with redecorating. Grace accepted the mug he handed her and wrapped both hands around it, savoring the warmth. In the morning light streaming through the massive windows, Daniel could see her more clearly, the sharp intelligence in her eyes, the fine bone structure beneath the gauntness, the way she held herself with a kind of dignity that suffering hadn't quite erased. She'd been someone once. Before whatever happened. We need to talk about Saturday, Daniel said, leaning against the counter. The story. How we met. What you do. People will ask questions. What do you want me to be? Grace asked, and there was an edge to the question. What do you mean? I mean, who do you need me to pretend to be? Someone successful to make your ex jealous? Someone artistic and free-spirited to prove you've changed? Someone real, Daniel interrupted. Just be yourself. Grace laughed, a sharp sound without humor. Myself? I'm homeless, Daniel. I sleep on the street. I haven't held a job in 2 years. I'm pretty sure yourself isn't the story you want to tell at a Hamptons wedding. Daniel set down his coffee mug with more force than necessary. Fine. Then tell me who you were. Before. Before what? Before the street. You weren't always. He gestured vaguely, unable to find words that wouldn't sound insulting. Grace's expression shuttered. Invisible. I didn't mean. Yes, you did. And you're right. She took a long sip of coffee, and Daniel saw her weighing how much truth to offer. I was a violinist. Professional. I played with the New York Philharmonic. I had a daughter. And then I didn't, and everything else fell apart, and 2 years later I'm standing in a stranger's kitchen negotiating what version of myself is acceptable for public consumption. The words were delivered flatly, stripped of emotion, which somehow made them more devastating. Your daughter, Daniel said carefully. What happened? Car accident. Drunk driver. She was 6. Grace's knuckles were white around the coffee mug. Her name was Lily. She loved music. Loved watching me play. After she died, I couldn't. Every time I picked up the violin, all I could hear was her asking for one more song. So I stopped playing. Stopped working. Started drinking. Lost my apartment. Lost everything else. The usual story. It wasn't usual. Nothing about it was usual. Daniel felt something crack open in his chest. Recognition, empathy, the awful understanding of what it meant to lose the thing that defined you. I'm sorry, he said, and meant it. Grace nodded, not looking at him. So that's who I was. Before. A violinist and a mother. Now I'm neither. You're still a violinist, Daniel said. You carry your violin everywhere. Carrying it isn't playing it. But you haven't sold it. You could have. You could have sold it for food or shelter or a bus ticket out of here. But you didn't. Grace finally looked at him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. It was Lily's favorite thing in the world. Selling it would have been like saying goodbye for real. Like admitting she's never coming back. The grief in her voice was so raw that Daniel had to look away. They stood in silence, two people who'd lost different things but understood the same kind of emptiness. We'll tell people you're a musician, Daniel said finally. Taking time off to figure out your next project. We met at a charity gala 3 months ago. You were performing. We started talking. It felt easy. Real. We've been seeing each other since, keeping it quiet because I'm private about my personal life. Grace considered this. That's believable. Almost romantic. Is that okay? It's fine. She set down her mug. What do I wear? I'm guessing my current wardrobe isn't appropriate. Daniel pulled out his phone. I'll have my assistant arrange for a stylist. Someone discreet. They'll come here, bring options, fit you for whatever you need. That must be nice, Grace said, and there was no bitterness in it, just observation. Having people who arrange your entire life for you. It's empty, Daniel said before he could stop himself. Having everything arranged but nothing that actually matters. Grace studied him with those two knowing eyes. Your ex Vanessa. When she left, she said you weren't present. What did she mean? Daniel felt the old defense mechanisms kick in, the urge to deflect, to shut down, to retreat behind the wall of control that had protected him his entire adult life. But Grace had just told him about her daughter. About Lily. About the worst thing that had ever happened to her. He owed her at least a piece of truth. She meant I was always working, he said. Always in my head, planning the next deal, the next acquisition, the next thing that would make me successful enough that I'd finally feel like I was enough. She'd be talking and I'd be on my phone. She'd want to plan our future and I'd be in Singapore closing a merger. She wanted a partner, and I gave her a business card. Were you always like that? I don't know. Maybe. I built my company from nothing. I was obsessed with proving I could make it, that I wasn't just another kid from Queens who'd end up managing his father's grocery store. And by the time I'd proven it, by the time I had the penthouse and the Forbes list and everything I thought I wanted. He trailed off. She was gone, Grace finished. She was gone. And I realized I'd built an empire with no one to share it with. No one who actually knew me. Hell, I don't know if I even know me anymore. Grace was quiet for a moment. Then, at least you lost your person by choice. By being too absent. I lost mine because some asshole decided to drive drunk on a Tuesday afternoon. You can fix absence. You can learn to show up. I can't fix death. The words were harsh, but not unkind. Just honest. You're right, Daniel said. I'm sorry. I'm sitting here feeling sorry for myself about a breakup while you... Don't do that, Grace interrupted. Don't minimize your pain because mine seems worse. Pain isn't a competition. You're allowed to hurt even if someone else is hurting more. Daniel looked at her, really looked at her, and saw past the gauntness, the worn clothes, the evidence of her fall. He saw the woman who'd survived losing her child. Who'd hit bottom and kept breathing anyway. Who carried her daughter's favorite thing everywhere because letting go meant accepting the unacceptable. She was extraordinary. And he'd picked her off a street corner to use as a prop in his petty revenge. The shame of it was almost overwhelming. Grace, he said. This whole thing, bringing you to the wedding, it's not fair to you. I was angry and hurt and I made a stupid impulsive decision. You don't have to do this. I'll still give you the full 5,000. You can walk away right now, and I'll call the whole thing off. Grace tilted her head, considering. And what will you do? Go alone? Or not go at all? Probably not go. Tell myself it doesn't matter. Keep living in this perfect apartment feeling like a failure because I couldn't keep one person interested enough to stay. Sounds healthy, Grace said dryly. Despite everything, Daniel laughed. Yeah, I'm a real inspiration. Grace picked up her coffee mug again, wrapping her hands around it. I'm not walking away. The deal stands. You need someone for Saturday, and I need the money. But Daniel. Yeah. Maybe we both need to stop using each other as props and actually show up. Be present. Even if it's just for one night. Even if it's all pretend. Her words hit him square in the chest. Be present. The thing Vanessa had accused him of never being. The thing he'd lost somewhere between ambition and achievement. The thing that might actually matter more than all the money and success he'd accumulated. Okay, Daniel said quietly. I can try to do that. Grace nodded. Good. Because I'm tired of being invisible. And I think you're tired of hiding behind all this. She gestured at the penthouse, the expensive everything, the life he built as armor. They stood in the kitchen of his sterile, perfect penthouse, two broken people who'd made a bargain that was starting to feel like something more. Something that might actually save them both. If they didn't destroy each other first. The stylist arrived at noon in a flurry of garment bags, shoeboxes, and the kind of effortless confidence that came from dressing people who mattered. Her name was Claudette, 60-something, French accent, sharp eyes that missed nothing. She swept into the penthouse like she owned it, took one look at Grace standing awkwardly in borrowed pajamas, and said, we have work to do. Grace bristled. I'm not a project. Claudette's expression softened marginally. No, Sherry. You are a woman who needs armor. And I provide the very best. Daniel had retreated to his office, claiming work emails, but really just giving them space. He could hear their voices through the door, Claudette's brisk instructions, Grace's occasional protests, the rustle of fabric and the click of heels on hardwood. He tried to focus on the quarterly reports on his screen. Tried not to think about the fact that he had a homeless woman in his guest room being fitted for a dress that would cost more than most people made in a month. Tried not to think about the look in Grace's eyes when she talked about her daughter. She was 6. Her name was Lily. Daniel's phone buzzed. His mother. Again. He declined the call. 30 seconds later, a text. I know you're avoiding me. Are you bringing someone Saturday? Please tell me you're not going alone to watch that woman marry your ex-partner. That's just sad, Daniel. He typed back, I'm bringing someone. And I'm fine, Mom. The response was immediate. Who? Do I know her? Is it serious? Daniel stared at his phone, then typed, it's new. You'll meet her Saturday. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Don't do anything stupid just to prove a point. You're better than that. Was he though? Daniel set down his phone and rubbed his face. The truth was, he had no idea what he was doing. He'd made an impulsive decision born of pride and pain, and now he had 3 days to prepare a woman he barely knew to walk into a world that would judge them both mercilessly. A world that included Vanessa. His chest tightened at the thought of seeing her again. 16 months and it still felt raw, still felt like a wound that wouldn't close. Not because he loved her, he was starting to suspect Grace had been right, that he loved the idea of not being alone more than he loved Vanessa herself, but because her leaving had confirmed his deepest fear. That he was fundamentally unlovable. Too cold. Too distant. Too broken to ever really let anyone in. Monsieur Pierce. Daniel looked up. Claudette stood in his office doorway, arms crossed, expression inscrutable. Your friend, she said carefully. She is difficult. Difficult how? She does not want to be dressed. She wants to disappear. Every beautiful thing I show her, she says no. Too much. Too visible. Too, Claudette made an exasperated gesture. She is fighting me on everything. Daniel stood. I'll talk to her. He found Grace in the guest room, surrounded by discarded dresses and rejected shoes, her face flushed with frustration. She changed back into her own clothes, the worn jeans and thin jacket she'd arrived in, and was holding her violin case like she was preparing to flee. I can't do this, she said when she saw him. Can't do what? This. Any of this. Grace gestured at the sea of designer clothing. That woman wants to put me in a dress that costs $8,000. $8,000. Do you know what I could do with $8,000? Do you know how many people I could feed? How many nights in a motel? How? Grace. Daniel's voice was calm, steady. It's just a dress. It's not just a dress. Her voice cracked. It's a costume. It's me pretending to be something I'm not. Someone who belongs in your world. Someone who, she stopped, breathing hard. Someone who matters. Daniel finished quietly. Grace looked at him, and he saw the terror in her eyes. Not of the wedding or the dress or even of him. Terror of being seen. Of stepping back into visibility after 2 years of learning how to disappear. Daniel moved carefully into the room, giving her space but closing the distance between them. You don't have to do this. I told you that this morning. The deal's off if you want it to be. But Grace. He waited until she met his eyes. You matter. Dress or no dress. Money or no money. You matter. You don't know me, she whispered. No. But I know what it looks like when someone's trying to disappear. I've been doing it in a penthouse for 16 months. At least you're honest about it. Grace clutched her violin case tighter. I don't know how to be that person anymore. The one who walks into rooms full of people and doesn't feel like an imposter. I've forgotten how. Then don't be that person. Be this one. The one standing in front of me right now. The one who survived losing everything. The one who's brave enough to keep breathing even when it hurts. That's not brave. That's just not having a choice. It's both, Daniel said. And for what it's worth, I think you're one of the bravest people I've ever met. Grace's laugh was bitter. You've known me for less than 24 hours. Sometimes that's all it takes. They stood in the debris of rejected finery, and Daniel saw her wavering. Saw the part of her that wanted to run warring with the part that wanted something more. Something that looked like hope. What if I wear the dress and people see right through me? Grace asked. What if they know I don't belong? What if your ex looks at me and knows exactly what I am? What are you, Grace? She looked at him, eyes bright with unshed tears. A failure. A woman who couldn't save her daughter. Couldn't save herself. A woman who's one bad day away from giving up completely. You know what I see. Daniel moved closer, and his voice was rough with an honesty he hadn't planned. I see someone who's been through hell and came out holding on to the one thing that mattered most. I see someone who'd rather sleep on concrete than sell her daughter's memory. I see someone real in a world full of people pretending. That's not failure, Grace. That's courage. A tear slipped down Grace's cheek, and she swiped at it angrily. You don't have to say things like that. The deal's the deal. I show up, I play my part, you pay me. You don't have to make me feel better about it. I'm not trying to make you feel better. I'm telling you the truth. Why? The question was almost a plea. Why do you care? Daniel didn't have a good answer. Didn't understand why this woman, this stranger, had gotten under his skin in less than a day. Why her pain felt like it mattered in a way nothing else had mattered in months. I don't know, he admitted. Maybe because you're the first person in a long time who's been honest with me. Maybe because I'm tired of everyone in my life wanting something from me except the one thing that actually counts. Which is just me. Not the money or the connections or the success. Just the person underneath all of it. You looked at me last night and saw right through all the bullshit. That's rare. Grace shook her head slowly. You're giving me too much credit. I'm just desperate enough to take money from a stranger to go to a wedding. That's not noble. That's survival. It can be both. Claudette appeared in the doorway, her expression carefully neutral. Shall I pack up? Or are we continuing? Grace looked at the dresses scattered across the bed. Looked at Daniel. Looked down at her violin case, at Lily's violin case, and something shifted in her expression. If I do this, she said slowly, I need to do it my way. Okay, Daniel said. I'm not wearing $8,000. That's obscene. Done. And I'm not pretending to be someone I'm not. If people ask what I do, I tell them the truth. I was a violinist. I'm taking time to figure out what's next. Perfect. And, Grace took a breath. And I bring my violin. To the wedding. If I'm pretending to be a musician, I should at least look like one. Daniel glanced at Claudette, who gave a tiny Gallic shrug that might have meant anything. You don't have to play, Daniel said carefully. I know. But if I'm going to be visible, I should carry the thing that made me visible in the first place. Even if I can't. She trailed off, but Daniel understood. Even if she couldn't actually play it. Even if it was just a symbol. A talisman. A reminder of who she'd been before the world broke her. Okay, he said. We do it your way. Grace nodded and turned to Claudette. Show me something simple. Elegant. Something that doesn't scream, I'm trying too hard. Claudette's eyes lit up. Ah. Now we are speaking the same language. Come, Sherry. I have the perfect thing. 2 hours later, Grace emerged from the guest room in a dress that stole Daniel's breath. It was midnight blue, almost black, with clean lines and a subtle shimmer that caught the light when she moved. Not too formal, not too casual. Elegant without being ostentatious. The kind of dress that whispered instead of shouted. She looked stunning. More than that, she looked like herself. Like Grace Holloway, the violinist. Like someone who belonged in the world but hadn't lost her humanity navigating it. Well? Grace asked, and Daniel heard the vulnerability beneath the question. You look perfect, he managed. Liar. I look like I'm playing dress-up. No. You look like someone worth knowing. Grace's expression flickered, disbelief warring with something that might have been gratitude. Claudette had done her makeup subtly, just enough to brighten her features without transforming her. Her hair, clean and properly trimmed, fell in soft waves around her face. She was beautiful. Not in the manufactured way of the women in his social circle, but in a real raw way that made Daniel's chest tight. The shoes are uncomfortable, Grace said, looking down at the modest heels Claudette had selected. I'll probably trip. Then we'll both trip together, Daniel said. I'm not exactly known for my dancing skills. A ghost of a smile touched Grace's lips. This is crazy. You know that, right? This whole thing is completely insane. Agreed. Your ex is going to take one look at me and know something's off. Probably. People are going to judge us. Judge you for bringing someone like me. Let them. Grace met his eyes, searching for something. Why are you really doing this, Daniel? And don't say revenge. There's something else. Daniel was quiet for a moment, trying to find words for the thing he barely understood himself. Maybe, he said slowly, I'm tired of being the person Vanessa left. The absent one. The one who couldn't show up. Maybe I'm hoping that if I can show up for you, really show up, be present, actually see you, then I'll prove to myself that I'm capable of it. That I'm not as broken as I think I am. The honesty of it hung in the air between them. That's a lot of pressure to put on a fake date, Grace said softly. I know. I'm sorry. That's not fair to you. No. Grace shook her head. I get it. I do. You want to be seen being present. I want to be seen at all. We're both just trying to prove we still exist. In the most dysfunctional way possible. Is there any other kind? Despite everything, the absurdity of the situation, the weight of what they were doing, the 3 days of terror still ahead, Daniel laughed. Really laughed. And Grace smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes, and for a moment they were just two broken people finding something that almost felt like lightness. Claudette emerged with garment bags and shoeboxes, looking satisfied. You have everything you need. The dress fits perfectly. The shoes will soften with wear. And you, Sherry, she touched Grace's cheek gently, you will be magnificent. Just remember, you are not wearing the dress. The dress is honoring you by being worn. After Claudette left, Grace changed back into the pajamas and they ordered dinner, Thai food from a place that delivered in those reusable containers Daniel always meant to return but never did. They ate at his dining table, which usually sat empty and unused, and talked about nothing important. Grace told him about playing in Paris once, a 3-week stint with a traveling ensemble when she was 25. Daniel told her about his first startup, how it failed spectacularly and he'd had to move back in with his mother for 6 months. They didn't talk about the wedding or Vanessa or what came after Saturday. They just talked. Like two people getting to know each other. Like this wasn't a transaction built on desperation and pride. And somewhere in the middle of the pad thai and the stories and the way Grace laughed when he described his mother's horror at his tech bro phase, she literally hid my hoodies, Grace. Hid them. Daniel felt something shift. This woman wasn't just a prop. Wasn't just a means to an end. She was real. Complicated. Funny in a dark way that matched his own humor. Smart enough to see through his defenses and kind enough not to eviscerate him for them. And he was starting to care about her in a way that had nothing to do with the wedding and everything to do with the way she looked when she talked about music, like she was describing a lost love she might never find again. What was it like? He asked during a lull in conversation. Playing professionally. Being that good at something. Grace was quiet for a moment, pushing noodles around her container. It was like breathing. Like the one thing in the world I was built to do. When I played, nothing else existed. Not anxiety or self-doubt or the thousand things that make life hard. Just the music and me and the feeling of being exactly where I belonged. Do you miss it? Every single day. Her voice was soft. But playing now, it would mean accepting that Lily's gone. That life continues without her. That I can create beauty in a world that let her die. I'm not ready for that. Daniel wanted to tell her she'd never be ready, that grief didn't work that way, that sometimes you just had to start before you felt like you could. But he didn't. Because who was he to give advice on moving forward when he'd been emotionally paralyzed for 16 months over a breakup? Instead he said, "Thank you." Grace looked up. For what? For trusting me. For not running when you probably should have. For being here. You're paying me $5,000. That's a pretty good incentive to stay. Still. Thank you. Grace held his gaze for a long moment, and something passed between them. Understanding, maybe. Or recognition. Or just the simple acknowledgement that they were in this strange thing together now, whatever it was. "You're welcome," she said finally. Later that night, after Grace had retreated to the guest room and Daniel was alone in his own bed staring at the ceiling, he realized the truth. He was scared. Not of the wedding or seeing Vanessa or what people would think. He was scared that this was working. That Grace was getting under his skin. That for the first time in 16 months, he felt something other than the dull ache of failure and loneliness. He was scared because in 3 days, after the wedding, Grace would take her money and disappear back into whatever life she'd come from. And he'd be alone again in his perfect penthouse with his perfect things and his perfect emptiness. He was scared because he was starting to hope. And hope, Daniel had learned, was the most dangerous thing of all. In the guest room, Grace lay in the impossibly soft bed, staring at the ceiling, and tried not to panic. The dress hanging in the closet felt like evidence. Evidence that she'd agreed to this. Evidence that she was going to walk into a room full of wealthy strangers and pretend to be something other than a complete disaster. Evidence that she was starting to trust Daniel Pierce. Which was stupid. Dangerous. The kind of mistake she couldn't afford to make. He was paying her. This was a transaction. In 3 days, it would be over and she'd have $5,000 and a chance to start putting her life back together. That was all this was. Except the way he'd looked at her when she came out in the dress. The way he'd defended her to the stylist. The way he'd said "you matter" like he actually meant it. The way he'd shared his own brokenness without making it a competition. Without trying to fix her or save her or make her into something she wasn't. Grace rolled onto her side and stared at her violin case, barely visible in the darkness. 3 days. She could do this for 3 days. Keep her walls up. Take the money. Walk away clean. She could absolutely do that. The fact that she was already starting to hope for something more, something that looked like connection, like being seen, like matching to someone who wasn't paying her to exist, was just proof that she was as foolish as she'd always been. Hope had destroyed her before. She wouldn't let it destroy her again. But as Grace finally drifted toward sleep, warm and clean and safe for the first time in 2 years, she couldn't quite convince herself that she believed it. The next 2 days passed in a strange blur of preparation and proximity. Wednesday, Daniel worked from home, something he never did, claiming he needed to be available for last-minute details. The truth was harder to admit. He didn't want to leave Grace alone in the penthouse. Not because he didn't trust her, but because leaving felt like abandoning her, and he'd spent 16 months being accused of abandoning someone. He set her up in the living room with his laptop, showing her how to search for apartments, jobs, resources for getting back on her feet. Grace navigated the websites with a focus that was almost painful to watch, someone drowning being handed a lifeline and trying desperately to hold on. "There's a shelter in Brooklyn," she said around noon, not looking up from the screen. "They have a program for women re-entering the workforce. Job training, resume help, temporary housing." "That sounds good," Daniel said from his position at the dining table, pretending to review contracts but really just watching her. I could apply. After Saturday. Once I have the money, I could. She trailed off, and Daniel saw her throat work as she swallowed. I could try again. You could, he agreed. Then carefully, or you could stay here. For a while. Until you figure things out. Grace's head snapped up. What? Daniel hadn't planned to say it. The words had emerged on their own, born from the increasingly uncomfortable realization that he didn't want Saturday to be the end of this. Didn't want to watch her walk out of his life with a check and disappear back into the city's shadows. The guest room is empty, he said, keeping his voice casual even though his heart was hammering. It's always empty. You could stay. Not forever. Just until you get back on your feet. A few weeks, a month. However long you need. Daniel. Grace closed the laptop. You can't just adopt stray people because you feel guilty. I don't feel guilty. Then what do you feel? It was a fair question. Daniel set down the contract he wasn't reading and tried to find an answer that was honest without being terrifying. I feel like this apartment has been empty for 16 months, he said finally. And for the first time since Vanessa left, it doesn't feel empty anymore. I feel like maybe we could help each other. You need a safe place to land. I need. He paused, searching. I need to remember what it's like to show up for someone. To be present. You said I could learn that. Maybe you could teach me. Grace stared at him, and he couldn't read her expression. You want me to teach you how to be present by, what? Living here? Being your emotional support homeless person. That's not, Daniel stopped, frustrated with his inability to articulate the thing he barely understood himself. I'm doing this badly. I'm not trying to save you or fix you or turn you into some kind of project. I'm just saying, maybe we don't have to say goodbye Saturday. Maybe this could be more than a transaction. What would it be instead? I don't know. Friends. Grace laughed, but it wasn't unkind. Daniel. You're a millionaire CEO. I'm a homeless woman you picked up off the street. We're not friends. We're two people playing pretend for a weekend. Are we though? Daniel leaned forward. Because it doesn't feel like pretend when we're talking at dinner. Or when you called me out this morning for checking my phone during breakfast. Or when you laughed at my story about my mother hiding my hoodies. That felt pretty real. Grace was quiet for a long moment, and Daniel saw her wavering. Saw the part of her that wanted to believe him fighting against years of learning that people always wanted something, that kindness always came with a price. What happens when you get tired of having me around? She asked quietly. When the novelty wears off and you realize I'm just a broken woman with too much grief and not enough to offer. What happens when you meet someone real, someone who actually fits in your world, and I'm just the charity case taking up your guest room? The fear in her voice was raw, unguarded, and it broke something in Daniel's chest. Grace, he said. I've spent 16 months surrounded by people who fit in my world. People who want my money or my connections or my influence. People who perform. You're the first person in over a year who's treated me like a human being instead of a resource. That's not novelty. That's not charity. That's, he stopped, unsure how to finish. That's what? Grace pressed. That's something I don't want to lose on Saturday. The honesty of it hung between them, vulnerable and terrifying. Grace looked down at her hands, cleaner now, the worst of the damage from street life beginning to heal. I'll think about it, she said finally. After Saturday. After we see if we can actually pull this off without destroying each other. Then I'll think about it. It wasn't a yes. But it wasn't a no either. Daniel took it as a victory. Thursday morning brought an unexpected complication, Daniel's mother. She showed up unannounced at 10 a.m., bypassing the doorman with a kind of maternal authority that transcended building security. Daniel opened his door to find Margaret Pierce standing in the hallway, perfectly coiffed and armed with a purse that probably cost more than Grace's violin. Mom. What are you doing here? You've been avoiding my calls. Margaret swept past him into the penthouse, eyes already scanning for evidence of whatever crisis she'd convinced herself was happening. I needed to make sure you hadn't done something catastrophically stupid before Saturday. I'm fine, Mom. You're going to your ex-fiancée's wedding, Daniel. That is the opposite of fine. That is, she stopped mid-sentence, her attention snagged by something behind him. Grace. Standing in the hallway leading from the guest room, wearing the pajamas Daniel had lent her, hair sleep-tousled, holding a coffee mug and looking every inch like someone who'd spent the night. The silence was deafening. Margaret's eyes went wide, then narrowed, then swung to Daniel with an expression he knew well. Maternal calculation mixed with barely suppressed interrogation. Mom, Daniel said quickly. This is Grace. Grace Holloway. She's coming with me to the wedding. I can see that, Margaret said slowly. Her eyes raked over Grace, assessing, judging, trying to piece together a story that made sense. Grace. How lovely to meet you. It wasn't lovely. It was loaded with 1,000 questions Margaret was too well bred to ask in front of a stranger, but would absolutely grill him about later. Grace, to her credit, didn't flinch. She set down her coffee mug and moved forward, extending her hand with a dignity that shouldn't have been possible in borrowed pajamas. Mrs. Pierce. It's nice to meet you. Margaret shook her hand, and Daniel saw his mother's expression flicker with surprise. Grace's handshake was firm, her eye contact steady, her demeanor calm despite being caught in what was clearly a compromising situation. Daniel didn't mention he was seeing anyone, Margaret said, and it was an accusation disguised as an observation. It's new, Grace said smoothly. We've been keeping it quiet. How did you meet? Grace glanced at Daniel, and he saw the question in her eyes. How much of the script do we use? A charity gala, Daniel supplied. 3 months ago. Grace was performing. Performing. Margaret's interest sharpened. Are you a musician? I was a violinist, Grace said. With the New York Philharmonic. I'm taking some time off to explore other opportunities. It was close enough to the truth to be believable, and Daniel watched his mother's posture shift slightly. A musician, that was respectable. Artistic. The kind of person Daniel might actually date if he weren't emotionally unavailable. The Philharmonic, Margaret repeated. How impressive. And you're comfortable attending Vanessa's wedding? That seems like a rather intense first public appearance as a couple. Mom, Daniel warned. But Grace just smiled, a small knowing smile that reminded Daniel why he'd been drawn to her in the first place. Mrs. Pierce, I know what you're really asking. You want to know if I'm good enough for your son. If I'm using him. If this is real or some kind of rebound situation that's going to blow up spectacularly at the worst possible moment. Margaret had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. I wouldn't put it quite so. It's okay, Grace interrupted gently. You're protecting him. That's what mothers do. The truth is, I don't know what this is yet. It's new and unexpected and probably terrible timing. But your son is kind. He's generous. He's trying to figure out how to show up in his own life, and I'm trying to do the same. So maybe we're both disasters. Or maybe we're exactly what each other needs right now. Either way, I'm not going to hurt him. Not intentionally. Daniel stared at her. She just defended him to his mother while simultaneously being more honest than any woman he'd ever dated. Margaret was quiet for a moment, studying Grace with new interest. Then, incredibly, she smiled, a real smile, not the polite society version. Well, she said. This is unexpected. That's one word for it, Grace agreed. Daniel, can I speak with you? Privately. Daniel looked at Grace, who nodded and retreated to the guest room with her coffee. Once the door closed, Margaret rounded on him. All right. Tell me the truth. What's really going on? Exactly what she said. We met, we're dating, it's new. Daniel Alexander Pierce, I have known you for 34 years. I know when you're lying. That woman is not your girlfriend. Daniel felt his defenses rise. Why? Because she's not Vanessa? Because she doesn't fit into your idea of who I should date? Because she's wearing your pajamas and looks terrified, Margaret said bluntly. Because you've been alone for 16 months and suddenly you have a live-in girlfriend you never mentioned? Because I'm your mother and I can tell when you're in over your head. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, exhausted. It's complicated. Uncomplicate it. He couldn't tell her the truth. Couldn't admit that Grace had been homeless, that he'd offer her money to attend the wedding, that this whole thing had started as a petty act of revenge that had somehow morphed into something he couldn't quite name. But he could tell her part of it. Grace is going through something, he said carefully. She lost someone important. Lost herself for a while. I'm helping her get back on her feet. The wedding it's a chance for both of us to prove we're not as broken as we think we are. Margaret's expression softened. You're helping her. We're helping each other. And you care about her. Really care about her. It wasn't a question. Daniel met his mother's eyes and found he couldn't lie. Yeah, he said quietly. I think I do. Margaret studied him for a long moment, then sighed. This is going to end badly, isn't it? Probably. But you're doing it anyway. Yeah. His mother shook her head, but she was smiling slightly. You know what? At least you're feeling something. That's more than you've done since Vanessa left. Just, be careful, Daniel. With her and with yourself. Saturday is going to be hard enough without adding real emotions to the mix. I know. Margaret kissed his cheek, then called toward the guest room. Grace? It was lovely meeting you. I look forward to seeing you Saturday. The door opened, and Grace appeared, still cautious. You too, Mrs. Pierce. Call me Margaret. And Grace? Whatever's happening here, I hope it works out. My son needs someone who sees him. Really sees him. I think maybe you do. After Margaret left, Grace and Daniel stood in the living room, the morning's chaos settling into uncomfortable silence. Well, Grace said finally. That was terrifying. She liked you. She thinks I'm your charity project. She thinks I care about you. She's not wrong. Grace looked at him, and Daniel saw vulnerability flash across her face before she locked it down. Daniel, don't. Don't what? Don't start believing this is real. Don't start caring. This is a transaction. Saturday happens, you pay me, we part ways. That's the deal. What if I don't want that to be the deal anymore? It doesn't matter what you want. Grace's voice rose, frustration and fear mixing. You live in a penthouse. I live on the street. You have money and success and a future. I have trauma and grief and a violin I can't play. This, she gestured between them, isn't sustainable. It's a fantasy born out of your pain and my desperation. And when Saturday is over, reality is going to come crashing back and we're both going to remember why people like me don't belong in worlds like yours. People like you, Daniel repeated. What does that mean? Broken. Poor. Used up. Stop. Daniel moved closer, and his voice was sharp. Stop reducing yourself to your worst moment. You're not broken. You're not used up. You're a woman who survived the worst thing that can happen to a parent and you're still here, still trying, still fighting. That's not weakness, Grace. That's strength. You don't understand, Grace said, and her voice cracked. Every person who's tried to help me, every shelter, every program, every well-meaning stranger, they all give up eventually. Because I'm too much work. Too damaged. I'm not giving up. You will. They all do. I'm not them. How do you know? Grace's eyes were wet now, tears threatening to spill. How do you know you won't wake up next week and realize this was a mistake? That I'm a mistake? Daniel didn't have a good answer. Couldn't promise her something he wasn't certain he could deliver. All he had was the truth. I don't know, he said. Maybe I will. Maybe this is all a terrible idea and we're both going to regret it. But Grace? For the first time in 16 months, I feel like I'm actually here. Present. Alive. You did that. Just by being honest. By calling me out. By existing in my space and refusing to be invisible. So no, I don't know what happens after Saturday. But I know I don't want to lose this. Lose you. Not yet. The tears spilled over, tracking down Grace's cheeks. She swiped at them angrily. This is so stupid. Completely stupid. We barely know each other. I know. This is going to hurt. When it ends, it's going to hurt so much. Probably. Grace laughed through her tears, a wet, broken sound. Why are you like this? Why can't you just let me push you away? Because I'm tired of being pushed away. And I think you're tired of pushing. They stood in the morning light of his penthouse, two broken people circling around the terrifying possibility that they might actually matter to each other. Grace wiped her face with her pajama sleeve, his pajama sleeve, and took a shaky breath. Okay. Okay, what? Okay, we do this. We go to the wedding. We survive Saturday. And then we figure out what comes next. Together. Maybe. It was tentative, qualified, wrapped in so many hedges it was barely a commitment at all. But it was enough. Daniel smiled. That's a start. Don't get too excited. I'm still probably going to panic and run away. I'll chase you. You're ridiculous. You're deflecting. I'm surviving. You're doing more than surviving, Grace. You're living. Maybe for the first time in 2 years, you're actually living. Grace looked at him, and something in her expression softened. Maybe you are too. They spent the rest of Thursday in strange domestic proximity, Daniel working at the dining table, Grace researching resources on the couch, both of them hyper-aware of the other's presence in a way that felt new and terrifying and almost comfortable. Grace made lunch, grilled cheese with tomato soup, apologizing for the simplicity, but Daniel ate it like it was the best meal he'd had in months because it was made by someone who cared whether he ate, not because she was paid to care. Daniel taught Grace how to use his ridiculously complicated coffee machine, laughing when she called it criminally over-engineered, and agreeing with her completely. They watched the sunset from the massive windows, Grace commenting that she'd forgotten what sunsets looked like from inside, how different they were when you weren't trying to figure out where you'd sleep that night. And slowly, carefully, the space between transaction and something real began to blur. That night, Daniel woke at 2 a.m. to the sound of crying. Soft, muffled, coming from the guest room. He lay in his bed listening, unsure if he should intervene or give her privacy. But the sound was so raw, so full of pain, that leaving her alone felt impossible. He knocked softly on her door. Grace. The crying stopped abruptly. Silence. Grace, can I come in? More silence. Then quietly, yeah. He found her sitting on the floor beside the bed, her back against the mattress, holding her violin case in her lap. Her face was wet with tears, her breathing uneven. Daniel sat down beside her, not touching, just present. Nightmare? He asked. Memory, Grace whispered. Lily. She used to beg me to play her to sleep. Every night, the same song. Brahms' lullaby. She'd fall asleep halfway through and I'd keep playing because... Her voice broke. Because I loved watching her sleep. Loved knowing she felt safe. What happened to her, Grace? The accident. Tell me. Grace was quiet for so long Daniel thought she wouldn't answer. Then, haltingly, she began. It was a Tuesday. I was supposed to pick her up from school, but I had a recording session that ran late. My ex-husband, we were separated, but he lived close by, he picked her up instead. They were walking to get ice cream. Lily's favorite place, 2 blocks from school. The driver ran a red light. Never even braked. Hit them both. David, my ex, he was injured but survived. Lily. She couldn't finish. I'm so sorry, Daniel said, and the words felt inadequate. She was wearing her favorite dress. Yellow, with little flowers. She'd picked it out that morning. Said it made her look like sunshine. Grace's voice was mechanical now, reciting facts to keep from drowning in feeling. The hospital called me. By the time I got there, she was already gone. They let me hold her. I held her and I played Brahms' lullaby on my phone and I tried to pretend she was just sleeping. Just sleeping. Daniel felt his own throat tighten. Where's your ex now? Gone. We tried to grieve together, but we just kept blaming each other. Him for being there. Me for not being there. Eventually he moved to California. I haven't heard from him in over a year. So you lost your daughter and your marriage. And my music and my home and my sanity. Grace laughed bitterly. I'm a real catch. You're a survivor. I don't want to be a survivor. The words exploded out of her. I want to be her mother. I want to wake up and have her crawl into my bed and demand pancakes. I want to hear her practicing scales badly. I want to sit through terrible school plays and pack lunches and complain about homework. I want my life back. I want her back. She was sobbing now, really sobbing, and Daniel did the only thing he could think of. He pulled her into his arms. Grace resisted for a second, then collapsed into him, her grief finally unleashed. She cried into his shoulder, huge wrenching sobs that shook her whole body, and Daniel held her, stroking her hair, whispering nonsense words that might have been comfort or might have been his own inadequate attempt to absorb some of her pain. They sat on the floor of his guest room, surrounded by his expensive things and her profound loss, and something shifted between them. This wasn't transaction anymore. This was witnessing. Being present. Showing up for someone's pain without trying to fix it or make it smaller or more palatable. This was real. When Grace finally quieted, exhausted from crying, she didn't pull away. She stayed in Daniel's arms, her head on his shoulder, breathing slowly. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For not saying it gets better. For not trying to make it okay. For just being here. I'm not going anywhere. You can't promise that. I can try. Grace finally pulled back, wiping her face. You should go back to bed. Sorry for waking you. Grace. I'm not leaving you alone right now. I'm fine. You're not fine. Neither am I. Can we just not be fine together for a while? Something in Grace's expression crumpled. Okay. They ended up on top of the guest bed, both fully clothed, Grace curled on her side and Daniel sitting with his back against the headboard. He didn't touch her except to rest his hand near hers on the blanket, close enough to reach, distant enough to give her space. Tell me about her, Daniel said softly. Tell me about Lily. The good stuff. So Grace did. She told him about Lily's obsession with dinosaurs, how she'd insisted on having a T-Rex-themed birthday party even though all her friends were into princesses. She told him about Lily's terrible singing voice, how she'd belt out Disney songs completely off-key and with utter confidence. She told him about the way Lily would bring her bugs and rocks and treasures from the playground, convinced each one was the most important discovery in human history. She talked until her voice was hoarse, until the memories stopped hurting quite so much and started feeling like gifts. Like proof that Lily had existed. Like testament to a love that hadn't ended just because life had. And Daniel listened. Really listened. Present. There. Exactly what he'd been trying to learn how to be. As the sky outside began to lighten with pre-dawn gray, Grace's breathing evened out. She'd fallen asleep mid-sentence, exhausted from grief and storytelling and the strange catharsis of being heard. Daniel carefully pulled a blanket over her, then settled back against the headboard. He should go to his own room. Should leave her to sleep in privacy. But he'd promised he wouldn't leave her alone. And for once, he was going to keep that promise. He was going to show up. Even if it scared him. Even if it hurt. Even if he had no idea what came next. He was going to be present. For Grace. And maybe, finally, for himself. Friday arrived with crystalline autumn sunlight and the wait of 24 hours until the wedding. Daniel woke in the guest room chair where he'd eventually moved, neck stiff and back aching. Grace was still asleep in the bed, curled around a pillow, her face peaceful in a way he'd never seen while she was awake. He watched her for a moment, this woman who'd stumbled into his life 4 days ago and somehow become essential, and felt something tight and terrifying in his chest. He was falling for her. Not the performance version. Not the woman in the midnight blue dress who'd play his date at the wedding. The real Grace. The one who cried at 2 a.m. and made grilled cheese and looked at him like she could see straight through to all his broken parts. This is a terrible idea, he thought. This is going to destroy us both. but he couldn't seem to stop it. Daniel slipped out of the room quietly and made coffee. Real coffee, not from the ridiculous machine, just simple drip coffee like his mother had made when he was a kid. Comfort coffee. Grace emerged an hour later, eyes puffy but clear, wearing the pajamas that had somehow become her uniform. "You stayed," she said. "I said I would. People say a lot of things. I meant it." Grace poured herself coffee and leaned against the counter, studying him. "Thank you. For last night. I don't usually. I try not to fall apart like that. Maybe you need to fall apart more often. Let someone catch you. Or maybe I need to stay put together so I don't drag anyone else down with me. Too late. I'm already down here with you." Despite everything, Grace smiled. "You're very dramatic. You know that. I'm a CEO. Drama is kind of the job description." They fell into comfortable silence, drinking coffee and watching the city wake up through the massive windows. After a while, Grace said, "We should talk about tomorrow. Actually talk about it. What to expect. Who'll be there. How to handle her." Daniel's stomach tightened at the mention of Vanessa, but Grace was right. They'd been avoiding the actual event, hiding in the strange bubble of the past few days. Tomorrow it would pop. "Okay," he said. "Let's talk." They settled on the couch with fresh coffee, and Daniel pulled up the wedding details on his phone. The ceremony is at 3. Cocktail hour at 4, reception at 5. It's at the Ocean View Estate in the Hamptons. Vanessa always wanted to get married by the water. About 150 guests. Most of them people from our old circle. My former business partners. Her family. People who know exactly who I am and what happened between us. And they'll all be wondering who I am and why you brought me. Yeah. Grace nodded slowly. "What's the story with Vanessa? The real story, not the sanitized version. If I'm walking into this, I need to understand what I'm walking into." Daniel set down his coffee and tried to figure out where to start. "We met 6 years ago," he said. "I was building the company, working 100-hour weeks, basically living at the office. She was working in marketing for one of our competitors. We met at an industry conference. She was beautiful, ambitious, had her whole life mapped out. I think I fell in love with the idea of her before I actually knew her." "What do you mean?" "She represented everything I thought I wanted. Stability. A partner who understood the business world. Someone who could handle the lifestyle. My mother loved her. My investors thought she was perfect for my brand." He laughed bitterly. "I proposed after 18 months. Seemed like the next logical step. That's the most unromantic thing I've ever heard." "That's because it was. I was checking boxes. Marriage, family, the whole package. Vanessa was the right person on paper. I convinced myself that was enough." Grace was quiet for a moment. "Did you love her?" "I thought I did. But looking back, I don't know if I loved her or if I loved not being alone. If I loved having someone in my life or if I was just terrified of the alternative." "What happened?" Daniel ran his hands through his hair, the memories still sharp despite the time. "The company was going through a rough patch. We were hemorrhaging money, investors were getting nervous. I was drowning in problems and I just shut down. Stopped communicating. Stopped being present. Vanessa tried, God, she really tried. She'd plan dinners and I'd cancel. She'd want to talk about the wedding and I'd be on a conference call. She'd cry and I'd tell her I'd make it up to her later, but later never came. And she left. She left. For Marcus Chun, my COO and supposed best friend. Turns out they'd been getting close for months, while I was busy ignoring both of them. She said he saw her. He was present. He showed up." Daniel's voice went flat. "She gave me back my grandmother's ring and married him instead. They're business partners now too. Merged my company with his. Everything I built, they're running together." Grace winced. "That's brutal." "Yeah. The kicker? They're probably better together than Vanessa and I ever were. He probably does see her. Probably is present. Probably loves her in all the ways I didn't know how to. So why go to the wedding? Why torture yourself?" Daniel looked at Grace, and the truth felt like broken glass in his throat. "Because I need to prove I'm not still that person. The one who couldn't show up. The one who lost everything because he was too afraid to be vulnerable. I need to walk in there with someone and actually be present. Actually see them. Actually give a damn. Even if that someone is just pretending. Except we're not pretending anymore. Are we?" Grace held his gaze for a long moment. "No," she said quietly. "I don't think we are." The admission hung between them, fragile and dangerous. "Tell me about Vanessa," Grace said. "What's she like? Really like?" Daniel thought about it. Beautiful. Polished. Everything in its place. She's the kind of person who has a 5-year plan and color-coded spreadsheets for everything. She wanted kids, a house in Westchester, a timeline for when I'd step back from the company. She wasn't wrong to want those things. I I couldn't give them to her. Why not? Because giving her those things meant being vulnerable. Meant admitting I wanted them too. Meant risking failure at something that actually mattered instead of just business metrics. And I am terrified of failing at the things that matter. So you failed by not trying. Exactly. Daniel laughed without humor. Self-fulfilling prophecy. My therapist would be so proud. You have a therapist? Had. Stopped going after Vanessa left. Couldn't handle someone else telling me all the ways I'd fucked up my life. Grace shook her head. You should go back. After tomorrow. Win or lose, you should go back. Will you come with me? The question surprised them both. Grace blinked. To therapy? Yeah. I mean, not my sessions. Your own. There are grief therapists, specialists who help with loss. I could help you find someone. Pay for it. Whatever you need. Daniel. I'm not trying to fix you, he said quickly. I'm just saying, you're helping me figure out how to show up. Maybe someone could help you figure out how to play again. How to let Lily's memory be a gift instead of a wound. Grace's eyes filled with tears. It's not that simple. I know. But maybe it could start to be. She nodded slowly, wiping at her eyes. Maybe. After tomorrow. If we survive tomorrow. We'll survive it. You sound very confident for someone who's about to watch his ex marry his former best friend. That's because I won't be watching them. I'll be watching you. The intensity of the statement landed between them like a confession. Grace looked away first, uncomfortable with the weight of it. We should practice. Practice what? Being a couple. If we're supposed to be dating, we should probably be able to stand next to each other without looking like strangers. Can you dance? Badly. Perfect. Me too. Grace stood and held out her hand. Daniel looked at it, this woman's hand scarred and healing, reaching for him, and took it. She pulled him to his feet and positioned them in a basic ballroom stance, her hand on his shoulder, his hand on her waist. They stood in the middle of his living room, no music, just the sound of the city below and their own breathing. This is weird, Grace said. Extremely weird. We look ridiculous. Completely ridiculous. But neither of them moved away. Daniel was acutely aware of everywhere they touched, her hand in his palm on her waist, the small space between their bodies that felt charged with possibility. Okay, Grace said, her voice slightly breathless. So we just sway? I think that's the general idea. They began to move, awkwardly at first, then finding a rhythm. No music, just the two of them turning slowly in the sunlight streaming through the windows. When people ask how we met, Grace said softly, what should I say? Tell them the truth. A charity event. You were performing. I couldn't take my eyes off you. That's too romantic. It's not romantic. It's true. I couldn't take my eyes off you that first night. You were sitting on that corner looking like you'd given up on the world, but you were still holding onto your violin. Still refusing to let go of the thing that mattered most. That takes courage. Grace stumbled slightly, and Daniel steadied her. I wasn't brave. I was surviving. It's the same thing. They kept swaying, and Daniel found himself pulling her slightly closer. She didn't resist, just let herself be drawn in until they were dancing for real, her head almost on his shoulder, their bodies fitting together in a way that felt natural. I'm scared, Grace whispered. Of tomorrow? Of all of it. Of the wedding, of Vanessa, of those people judging me. Of you seeing me in that world and realizing I don't belong. Of this, she gestured vaguely between them, meaning something and then falling apart. I'm scared of hoping again, Daniel. Hope is what destroyed me the first time. Daniel stopped moving, and Grace looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I'm scared too, he admitted. I'm scared of walking into that wedding and feeling nothing. Or worse, feeling everything. I'm scared of watching Vanessa marry Marcus and realizing I never loved her the way he does. I'm scared that you're right, that you don't belong in my world and on Sunday you'll disappear and I'll be alone again. I'm scared that I'm falling for you and you're still half in love with your grief. I'm still in love with my grief, Grace said. It's all I have left of her. No, it's not. You have your music. You have your memories. You have the way she changed you, made you better. The grief is it's just the shadow. It's not Lily. Grace pulled away from him, wrapping her arms around herself. Don't tell me how to grieve. You don't understand. You're right. I don't. But Grace, you're drowning in it. And I think part of you knows that. What else am I supposed to do? She was my world. She was everything. And now she's gone and I'm still here and nothing makes sense and the only thing that feels real is the pain. If I let go of the pain, I let go of her. That's not true. You don't know that. I know that Lily wouldn't want you sleeping on the street. She wouldn't want you broken and alone and unable to play the music she loved. She wouldn't want this for you. Grace's face crumpled. Don't use my daughter against me. I'm not. I'm just telling you what I see. I see a woman who loves her daughter so much that she's willing to destroy herself to keep that love alive. But Grace? You don't honor her memory by dying slowly on a street corner. You honor it by living. By playing. By letting other people see the beauty she saw in you. The tears spilled over, and Grace's voice was raw. I don't know how. So let me help you figure it out. Let me be present for you the way I should have been for Vanessa. Let me show up. Please. Grace wiped her face roughly. This is too much. Too fast. We barely know each other and you're talking about helping me rebuild my life and I can't be someone's project, Daniel. I can't be another box you check. Another way to prove you're not the person Vanessa left. Is that what you think this is? I don't know. I don't know what this is. I just know it's happening too fast and tomorrow we're going to walk into that wedding and everyone is going to see right through us and I'm going to embarrass you, Anne. Stop. Daniel moved closer, and his voice was firm. You could never embarrass me. Never. Grace, you're the strongest person I've ever met. You've survived things that would have destroyed most people. You carry your daughter's memory with dignity. You tell the truth even when it's hard. You see people, really see them, in a way that makes them want to be better. That's not embarrassing. That's extraordinary. I'm homeless, Daniel. I'm broken. You're here. Present. Real. More real than anyone I've met in years. That's what matters. They stood facing each other in the middle of his living room, the space between them charged with everything they weren't saying. Finally, Grace spoke, her voice small. What if I can't do this? What if I get to the wedding and panic? Then we leave. We get in the car and we leave and we try again another day. What if I embarrass you? Impossible. What if Vanessa is cruel to me? Then I'll take you home and we'll order takeout and watch bad movies and forget the whole thing. What if, Grace stopped, swallowed hard. What if this is real? What if we're not pretending anymore and that means we can hurt each other in ways that matter? Daniel moved closer, close enough to touch her but not touching. Then we hurt. And we heal. And we try again. Because Grace, I'd rather risk real pain with you than keep living in this numb, safe half-life I've been in for 16 months. At least with you, I feel something. That's the problem, Grace whispered. I feel something too. And I promised myself I'd never let anyone matter again. Because when they matter, they can destroy you. And I'm barely surviving the last destruction. I'm not asking to destroy you. I'm asking to know you. The real you. The one who loved her daughter and played violin and survived the unsurvivable. I'm asking for a chance. That's all. Grace looked at him for a long moment, and Daniel saw her wavering. Saw the battle between the part that wanted to run and the part that wanted to stay. One day at a time, she said finally. We get through tomorrow. Then we figure out what comes next. No promises. No expectations. Just, one day at a time. It wasn't everything. But it was something. Okay, Daniel said. One day at a time. That afternoon. They spent the rest of Friday in careful preparation. Daniel went over the guest list, pointing out key people Grace might encounter. His mother. His sister who'd flown in from California. Former colleagues. Vanessa's family. Grace listened, memorizing names and faces, asking smart questions about relationships and dynamics. She was preparing for battle, and Daniel found himself both impressed and protective. Around 4 p.m., Grace disappeared into the guest room and emerged an hour later in the midnight blue dress. She'd done her own makeup this time, subtle, elegant, emphasizing her eyes. Her hair was pinned up in a simple style that showed off her neck. She looked beautiful, but more importantly, she looked like herself. Practice run, she explained. I need to make sure I can walk in these shoes without falling. And I wanted to see if I could look at myself in this dress without panicking. And? Daniel asked. And I'm only mildly panicking, which feels like progress. She walked around the living room, getting used to the heels, and Daniel watched her transform. Not into someone else, but into a version of herself she'd forgotten existed. Grace Holloway, the violinist. The woman who'd performed at Carnegie Hall. The woman who'd owned her space in the world before grief had stolen it. You're staring, Grace said. You're beautiful. You're paid to say that. Actually, I'm paying you. So technically you're paid to let me say it. Grace laughed, and the sound filled something in Daniel's chest he hadn't known was empty. She moved to the window, looking out at the city spread below them. Tomorrow, after the wedding, when we come back here, what happens? Do I pack up and leave? Do I stay? Do we pretend this never happened? Daniel joined her at the window. What do you want to happen? I don't know. I think. She paused, searching for words. I think I want to try. To stay. To see if this thing between us is real or just trauma bonding. But I'm terrified that the second I commit to trying, everything will fall apart. What if it doesn't? That's scarier. Because then I'd have to believe in something again. And belief is what killed me the first time. Daniel took her hand, the first time he'd initiated touch since they'd stopped dancing that morning. Her fingers were cold, but she didn't pull away. "Grace Holloway," he said formally. "Tomorrow we're going to walk into that wedding together. We're going to face my ex and my former friend and 150 people who have opinions about my life. And we're going to do it as a team. Present. Visible. Real. And then we're going to come home and figure out what comes next. Deal?" Grace looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. "Deal. But Daniel." "Yeah. If I'm doing this, really doing this, not just the wedding but the after, I need you to promise me something." "Anything." "Promise me you'll show up. Not just physically, but actually be there. Be present. Because I can survive a lot of things, but I can't survive being invisible again. Not after this. Not after you've made me feel seen." The request landed in Daniel's chest like a vow. "I promise," he said. "I'll show up. For you. For me. For us. Whatever we are or might be." Grace nodded, and Daniel saw acceptance in her eyes. Acceptance of the risk, of the possibility, of the terrifying hope that maybe, just maybe, they could be each other's second chance. They stood at the window as the sun set over Manhattan, two broken people on the eve of walking back into the world that had hurt them, holding hands and hoping it would be enough. Tomorrow would be brutal. Tomorrow would test them in ways they couldn't fully prepare for. But tonight, in this moment, they had each other. And for now, that was everything. That evening, Grace stood in front of her violin case for the first time since arriving at Daniel's penthouse. She'd been avoiding it, avoiding the weight of what it represented, the memories it held, the future it might not contain. But if she was going to bring it to the wedding tomorrow, if she was going to carry Lily's favorite thing as armor and talisman, she needed to face it. Her hands shook as she opened the case. The violin gleamed in the lamplight, polished wood, gentle curves, strings that hadn't been played in 2 years. It was beautiful. It was torture. Grace lifted it carefully, feeling the familiar weight in her hands. Muscle memory kicked in, how to hold it, where her fingers should rest, the way the wood warmed against her collarbone. She didn't pick up the bow. Wasn't ready for that. But she held it. Let herself remember what it felt like to be Grace Holloway, violinist. Before the accident. Before the grief. Before she'd forgotten how to exist in the world. "That's a beautiful instrument," Daniel said from the doorway. Grace hadn't heard him approach. She looked up, startled, still holding the violin. "It was my grandmother's," she said. "She left it to me when I was 12. Said I was the only one in the family who could make it sing." "Will you play for me?" Daniel asked. Then quickly, "Sorry. That's not fair. You don't have to." But Grace surprised herself by saying, "Maybe. Someday. When I'm ready. Take all the time you need." Grace carefully returned the violin to its case. "Lily used to sit right next to me when I practiced. She'd close her eyes and sway like she could see the music. She said it made pictures in her head, colors and shapes and stories. She had this whole world the music created for her. She sounds magical." She was. She was the best thing I ever did. The only thing I got completely right. "Grace," Daniel said gently. "You got a lot of things right. You're just having trouble seeing them right now." Grace closed the violin case and looked at him, this man who'd stumbled into her life 4 days ago and somehow become essential. "Thank you," she said. "For all of this. For seeing me. For not giving up. For tomorrow. Whatever happens, thank you." Daniel crossed the room and pulled her into a hug. Grace let herself lean into him, feeling the solid warmth of another person, the comfort of not being alone. "We're going to be okay," Daniel whispered into her hair. "Both of us. Somehow, we're going to be okay." Grace wanted to believe him. Tomorrow would tell them if he was right. Saturday morning arrived with merciless clarity. Daniel woke before dawn, unable to sleep, his mind already at the wedding venue in the Hamptons. By the time Grace emerged from the guest room at 7, he'd been awake for 2 hours, pacing the living room in sweatpants and anxiety. "You look terrible," Grace observed, pouring herself coffee. "Thanks. That's exactly what I needed to hear. I mean, you look like you haven't slept. Which, judging by the dark circles, you haven't." Daniel ran a hand through his hair. "I kept thinking about walking in there. Seeing her. Seeing them together. Everyone watching to see if I'd fall apart." Grace set down her mug and moved closer. "Hey, look at me." She waited until he met her eyes. "You're not going to fall apart. And if you do, I'll be there to catch you. That's what today is about, remember? Showing up for each other. What if I can't do it? What if I see her and realize I'm still what? Still in love with her?" Grace's expression was carefully neutral, but Daniel heard the vulnerability beneath the question. No. Still broken because of her. Still defined by being the guy who couldn't keep her. Still, he stopped, frustrated with his inability to articulate the fear. "Still letting your past write your future?" Grace finished softly. "Yeah, that." Grace took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "Daniel. You're not that person anymore. You've spent the last week showing up. Being present. Seeing me, really seeing me, in ways I haven't been seen in 2 years. That's not broken. That's growth. What if it's not enough? Then it's not enough. But at least you tried. At least you showed up. She squeezed his hand. And you won't be alone. I'll be right there. Your partner in crime. Your accomplice in emotional terrorism. Despite his anxiety, Daniel smiled. Emotional terrorism? We're bringing a homeless woman to your ex's Hampton's wedding. If that's not emotional terrorism, I don't know what is. You're not homeless anymore. You live here now. The words came out without thought, casual and certain. They both froze. I live here, Grace repeated slowly. I mean, if you want to. We talked about it. About you staying. About trying. That was before. When we were still pretending this was a transaction. We're not pretending anymore. Grace looked at him, and Daniel saw hope and terror warring in her expression. No, she agreed quietly. We're not. They stood in his kitchen as the city woke up around them, holding hands and facing the truth neither had been ready to say out loud. This was real. Whatever this was, it mattered. And that made today infinitely more terrifying. The drive to the Hamptons took 2 hours through autumn foliage and mounting dread. Daniel had hired a driver, partially for comfort, but mostly because he didn't trust himself behind the wheel. Grace sat beside him in the back seat, still in comfortable clothes, the midnight blue dress carefully preserved in a garment bag. Tell me about the venue, Grace said, clearly trying to distract him from his spiraling thoughts. It's called Ocean View Estate. Sits right on the water. Vanessa found it 2 years ago during one of her Pinterest wedding planning sessions. We went to look at it once, but I had to leave early for a conference call and she ended up doing the tour alone. So this was supposed to be your wedding venue? Daniel nodded grimly. Yeah. The irony isn't lost on me. Grace was quiet for a moment. That's cruel. Why would she choose this place knowing it was supposed to be yours? Maybe she forgot. Or maybe. Daniel trailed off. Maybe what? Maybe she's trying to prove something. That she got everything she wanted, just with someone else. That I was the problem, not the dream. Or maybe, Grace said carefully, she chose it because it's beautiful and by the water and sometimes places are just places. Not everything is about you, Daniel. The bluntness of it startled a laugh out of him. Wow. Tell me how you really feel. I'm serious. You're so wrapped up in what this wedding means about you, about your failures, your inadequacies, that you're forgetting she's just a person getting married. She's probably too busy worrying about flowers and seating charts to be thinking about whether her venue choice will devastate her ex. When did you get so wise? I had a lot of time on the street to think. And to realize that most of our suffering comes from making everything about ourselves. Sometimes shit just happens. Sometimes people move on. Sometimes weddings are just weddings. Daniel considered this. So what you're saying is I should stop being a narcissistic asshole and accept that Vanessa's wedding isn't actually a commentary on my worth as a human being? Exactly. See? You are capable of growth. They fell into comfortable silence, watching the landscape transform from urban sprawl to suburban wealth to coastal luxury. Around exit 70, Grace said, I'm nervous. About the wedding? About meeting your world. Your people. What if they hate me? What if I say the wrong thing? What if I use the wrong fork? Daniel looked at her, this woman who'd survived homelessness and loss and grief most people couldn't imagine, and she was worried about forks. Grace. These people are performers. They're all playing roles, successful spouse, perfect parent, person who has their life together. You're the most real person who'll be in that room. Trust me, they should be nervous about meeting you. That's not how it works though. They have power. Money. Belonging. I'm just the charity case crashing their party. You're not a charity case. You're my, Daniel stopped, unsure how to finish the sentence. What were they? Date? Girlfriend? Woman I am falling for who lives in my guest room? You're what? Grace prompted. My person, Daniel said finally. You're my person. The one I'm showing up for. The one who's showing up for me. That's more real than any of their performances. Grace smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Pretty words. Let's see if they hold up when we're surrounded by people who actually belong. They arrived at the Ocean View Estate at noon, 3 hours before the ceremony, plenty of time to find their hotel, change, and mentally prepare. Except there was a problem. I'm sorry, Mr. Pierce, the hotel receptionist said, her professional smile strained. But we only have one room reserved under your name. A king suite. Daniel's stomach dropped. No. I booked 2 rooms. 2 kings. Separate rooms. Let me check again. The receptionist typed frantically. I see the reservation was made 3 weeks ago for 1 king suite. There's no record of a second room. Daniel closed his eyes. He'd made the reservation before he'd met Grace, back when he'd planned to come alone. He'd been so caught up in everything this week that he'd never updated it. It's fine, Grace said quietly. We'll make it work. Grace. It's fine, she repeated, but her voice was tight. The room was beautiful, king bed, ocean view, separate sitting area with a couch that Daniel immediately claimed. I'll sleep on the couch, he said, dropping their bags. Don't be ridiculous. We can share the bed. We're adults. Grace, I'm not going to make you. Daniel. She turned to face him, and her expression was strained. We've spent the week building this thing between us on honesty, right? So here's some honesty. I'm terrified right now. Terrified of this wedding, of seeing your ex, of all those people judging me. Terrified that I'll do something wrong and embarrass you. Terrified that after today, you'll realize I don't fit and this whole thing will fall apart. I'm barely holding it together. So please don't make me argue about sleeping arrangements. We'll share the bed. It's fine. Everything's fine. The tremor in her voice said everything wasn't fine. Daniel moved closer. Talk to me. What's really going on? I told you. I'm scared. It's more than that. Grace was silent for a long moment, then, this room. This hotel. This whole world. It's the world I used to belong to. Before Lily died, I stayed in places like this. Traveled for performances. Had money and status and people who respected me. And now I'm back, but I'm different. Broken. Pretending to be someone I'm not anymore. It feels like wearing a dead woman's clothes, Daniel finished softly. Yes. Exactly that. Daniel reached for her hand. You're not dead, Grace. You're here. Alive. Different than you were, but still here. That's what matters. Is it though? Because right now I feel like a ghost. Like I'm haunting my own life. Daniel pulled her into a hug, and Grace collapsed into him, her careful composure finally cracking. I don't know if I can do this, she whispered into his shoulder. I thought I could, but now we're here and it's real and I'm so scared. We can leave. Right now. We can get back in the car and go home and forget the whole thing. No. You need this. You need to face her. To prove to yourself you can show up. Not if it breaks you. Grace pulled back, wiping her eyes. I'm already broken. Remember. You're not broken. You're healing. There's a difference. She managed a weak smile. When did you become so wise? I had a good teacher. She's stubborn and infuriating and makes me want to be better. She sounds terrible. She's the best thing that's happened to me in 2 years. The honesty of it hung between them, not romantic, not yet, but real. True. The kind of truth that mattered more than performance or pretense. Grace took a shaky breath. Okay. I'm okay. We do this. Together. Together, Daniel agreed. At 3 p.m., they stood outside the Ocean View estate. The venue was stunning, manicured lawns, white tents, the Atlantic glittering beyond. Guests were already arriving in expensive cars, designer outfits, the kind of effortless wealth that came from never having to think about money. Grace looked like she might be sick. She was wearing the midnight blue dress, her hair pinned up, makeup subtle but elegant. She looked beautiful and terrified. Her violin case was tucked under one arm, the talisman she'd insisted on bringing. Daniel wore a tailored navy suit, Italian shoes, the costume of success he'd perfected over the years. He looked confident. He felt like he was walking to his execution. Ready? He asked. Absolutely not, Grace replied. Me neither. Then why are we doing this? Daniel took her hand, the one not clutching the violin case, and laced their fingers together. Because we're done being invisible. Both of us. We're done hiding from the things that scare us. We're done letting our pasts define our futures. Today we show up. We are present. We're real. Together. Grace squeezed his hand so hard it hurt. Okay. Let's do this before I lose my nerve. They walked up the pathway together, and Daniel felt every eye turn toward them. Felt the whispers start, the speculation, the judgment. Is that Daniel Pierce? Who's that with him? Where has he been? Grace's grip on his hand tightened, and Daniel squeezed back. A promise. A reminder. I'm here. You're here. We're here together. They reached the entrance where a coordinator was checking names against a list. She looked up, smiled professionally, then did a double take when she saw Daniel. Mr. Pierce. Welcome. And your guest is? Grace Holloway, Daniel said clearly. She's with me. The coordinator checked the list, found his name, and waved them through. Just like that, they were inside. The estate was even more beautiful up close, all glass and light and ocean views. Guests mingled with champagne glasses, their laughter carrying on the sea breeze. Daniel recognized faces from his old life, colleagues, friends, people he'd once called his inner circle. They all stared. Everyone's looking at us, Grace whispered. Let them look. Daniel's mother appeared first, descending on them with the precision of a tactical strike. She looked elegant in pale pink, her expression carefully neutral. Daniel. Grace. You made it. Margaret kissed Daniel's cheek, then surprised them both by doing the same to Grace. You look lovely, dear. That's a perfect dress. Thank you, Mrs. Margaret, Grace corrected herself. Come. Let me introduce you to Daniel's sister before the ceremony starts. She's been dying to meet the mysterious woman who's tamed my son. Tamed is a strong word, Daniel protested. Improved, then. You look present. Actually here. It's been a while. Margaret led them through the crowd, making introductions, running interference when people's curiosity became intrusive. Daniel's sister, Claire, embraced Grace like an old friend. Thank God, Claire whispered. I was terrified he'd come alone and spend the whole night brooding. You're doing a public service. I'm just here for the free champagne, Grace replied, and Claire barked a laugh. What would you do if you had to face your biggest failure while holding on to your biggest hope? Share your thoughts below, because sometimes courage is just showing up scared. They found their seats in the ceremony area, rows of white chairs facing the ocean, an altar decorated with flowers Daniel knew Vanessa had spent months selecting. The irony of watching his ex get married in the venue they'd once toured together wasn't lost on him, but Grace's earlier words echoed. Sometimes weddings are just weddings. He was trying to believe that. The ceremony started with Pachelbel's canon, because of course it did. Marcus appeared at the altar looking nervous and genuine, and Daniel felt nothing. No anger. No jealousy. Just a distant observation that Marcus was clearly terrified and clearly in love. Then Vanessa appeared. She was stunning, ivory dress, flower crown, smile that could power the whole estate. She walked down the aisle on her father's arm, and Daniel waited for the pain to hit. It didn't. What hit instead was a wave of clarity. She was beautiful and this was probably the happiest day of her life and he felt absolutely nothing. Not hurt. Not anger. Not even regret. Just nothing. Grace's hand found his under the seats, fingers lacing with his, and Daniel realized something profound. He wasn't here for Vanessa. Wasn't here to prove anything to her or to Marcus or to anyone in this tent. He was here because coming here with Grace had forced him to be present. To show up. To feel something other than the dull ache of failure he'd been living with for 16 months. Vanessa and Marcus said their vows, beautiful, heartfelt vows about showing up and being present and choosing each other every day. Daniel listened and felt no irony, no pain. Just the quiet acknowledgement that they'd found something real. Something he'd never had with Vanessa. When the officiant pronounced them married and they kissed to enthusiastic applause, Daniel felt Grace's hand tighten in his. You okay? She whispered. Yeah, he said, surprised to find it true. I really am. The cocktail hour was harder than the ceremony. People approached with careful curiosity, asking about Grace, about where Daniel had been, about whether he was really doing okay. The questions were well-meaning but exhausting, performance disguised as concern. Grace handled it with surprising grace, pun intended, deflecting intrusive questions, steering conversations toward neutral territory, staying close enough to Daniel that he felt anchored. Then Vanessa found them. She looked radiant in her wedding dress, Marcus beside her looking protective and slightly guilty. Daniel felt his entire body tense, felt Grace's hand slip into his again. Daniel, Vanessa said, her smile warm but her eyes uncertain. I'm so glad you came. I wasn't sure you would. Wouldn't have missed it, Daniel lied smoothly. Congratulations. To both of you. Thank you. Vanessa turned to Grace, and Daniel saw her taking in every detail, the dress, the violin case, the way Grace stood close to him. And you must be? Grace Holloway, Grace said, extending her hand. It's nice to meet you, Vanessa. You look beautiful. Thank you. That's kind. Daniel mentioned you're a musician. Was. Taking some time off to figure out what's next. How did you two meet? Daniel felt Grace tense beside him, but her voice remained steady. Charity event. 3 months ago. Daniel was there pretending to care about art, I was there pretending to network. We ended up in the corner making fun of the pretentious gallery descriptions. It was so close to what they'd rehearsed but delivered with enough genuine humor that it felt real. Vanessa laughed. That sounds like Daniel. He always hated those events. She looked at Daniel, and something shifted in her expression. You look good. Happy. I'm glad. You too, Daniel said. You both look happy. Really happy. Marcus spoke for the first time, his voice quiet. Daniel, I'm sorry. For how things went down. For. Don't, Daniel interrupted, and his voice was surprisingly gentle. It's okay. Really. You two are good together. Better than we were. I can see that now. The admission hung in the air, and Daniel saw Vanessa's eyes brighten with tears. Thank you, she whispered. That means more than you know. They stood in a small circle, the woman Daniel had thought he'd marry, the man she'd left him for, and the woman who'd somehow become his second chance, and for the first time, there was no bitterness. No anger. Just the quiet acknowledgement that sometimes people grow apart and it's no one's fault. I hope you'll both be happy, Vanessa said, looking between Daniel and Grace. You deserve it. After they walked away, Daniel let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. That was surreal, he said. You handled it well, Grace replied. Very mature. I feel like I just passed some kind of test. You did. You showed up. You were present. You meant what you said. That's huge, Daniel. He looked at her, this woman who'd been a stranger a week ago and now felt essential, and felt something crack open in his chest. Thank you, he said. For being here. For doing this. For. Don't thank me yet, Grace interrupted, her eyes on something over his shoulder. We're not done. Daniel turned to see what she was looking at and felt his stomach drop. A woman was approaching with a microphone and a determined expression. The maid of honor. About to give a toast. About to, undoubtedly, tell stories about Vanessa and Marcus's perfect love story that would include references to Daniel's failures. This is going to be bad, Daniel muttered. Then we survive it together, Grace said, and pulled him closer. The maid of honor began her speech, heartfelt, funny, with exactly the kind of pointed references to finding real love and being truly seen that made Daniel want to disappear. But Grace's hand stayed in his. Her presence beside him remained steady. And slowly, Daniel realized something. These people's opinions didn't matter. Vanessa's story didn't define him. His past didn't have to write his future. What mattered was right here, Grace beside him, both of them showing up, both of them present, both of them trying to be better than their worst moments. When the speeches ended and dinner was served, Grace leaned over and whispered, "How are you doing?" "Really?" Daniel considered the question. "I'm good. Actually good. I thought being here would destroy me, but..." He trailed off, searching for words. "But..." Grace prompted. "But watching Vanessa marry Marcus, hearing about their love story, seeing how happy they are, it just made me realize I never had that with her. We were comfortable. Compatible on paper. But we never had what they have. And Grace..." He turned to face her fully. "I think maybe I'm starting to understand what it could feel like. To really see someone. To really be seen." Grace's eyes went wide. "Daniel." "I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I'm just saying, thank you. For showing me what it means to be present. To show up. To care about someone in a way that actually matters." Grace looked like she might cry. "You're welcome," she whispered. They sat in that beautiful venue, surrounded by people celebrating a love story that didn't include them, and found their own moment of connection. The kind that mattered more than any wedding toast. The kind that felt like the beginning of something real. The reception moved into full swing as the sun set over the Atlantic, casting everything in golden light. Daniel and Grace had found a rhythm, dancing awkwardly to songs neither knew, making quiet observations about the other guests, existing in their own bubble while the celebration swirled around them. For a few hours, it almost felt normal. Easy. Like they were just two people at a wedding, not two broken people trying to prove they could be whole. Grace had relaxed enough to laugh genuinely at Daniel's terrible dance moves. Daniel had stopped scanning the room for Vanessa and started actually enjoying himself. They were present together, exactly as they'd promised. Then everything shattered. It started innocently enough. Daniel excused himself to use the restroom, leaving Grace at their table with his sister Claire and Claire's husband. When he returned 10 minutes later, the table was empty. He found Claire at the bar, alone. "Where's Grace?" Daniel asked. Claire's expression was carefully neutral in a way that immediately set off alarm bells. "She went outside. To get some air," she said. "What happened?" "Daniel, I don't think." "What happened?" Claire sighed. "Amanda Westbrook happened. You remember her? Vanessa's college roommate? The one who works in arts administration." Daniel's stomach dropped. Amanda Westbrook. Notorious gossip. Relentless social climber. The kind of person who weaponized information for sport. What did she say? "I don't know exactly. I was getting drinks. But when I came back, Grace looked like she'd been slapped." Amanda was smiling that shark smile of hers. Grace excused herself and basically ran for the exit. Daniel was already moving before Claire finished speaking. He found Grace on the beach, standing at the edge of the water with her arms wrapped around herself, her shoes dangling from one hand. The violin case sat in the sand beside her like a abandoned anchor. "Grace." She didn't turn around. "You should go back. People will notice you're gone." "I don't care about people." "What happened?" "Nothing. I just needed air." "Grace." Daniel moved closer, but she stepped away, maintaining distance. "What did Amanda say to you?" "It doesn't matter." "It clearly does. Tell me." Grace laughed, a bitter sound that carried on the ocean breeze. "She recognized me. Amanda Westbrook. Apparently she used to attend Philharmonic performances. She remembered me. Grace Holloway, the promising young violinist. And she remembered when I disappeared from the music scene 2 years ago." Daniel's chest tightened. "Okay. So she recognized you. That's not..." "She asked where I'd been," Grace interrupted, her voice sharp. Asked if I was still performing, what I'd been up to, the usual small talk. And I tried to deflect, tried to be vague, but she kept pushing. She's good at that. Pushing. Finding the weak spots. What did you tell her? The truth. Sort of. That I'd lost my daughter. That I'd taken time away from music. That I was figuring out what came next. Grace's voice cracked. And you know what she said? She said, "Oh, how tragic. And you've moved on with Daniel Pierce, of all people. How unexpected." What's that supposed to mean? Don't be dense, Daniel. You know exactly what it means. Grace finally turned to face him, and her expression was devastated. She knows. Or she suspects. That I'm not really your girlfriend. That this is all performance. That her voice broke. That I'm exactly what I am. A homeless woman you picked up off the street to use as a prop at your ex's wedding. You're not a prop. Aren't I though? Grace's eyes were bright with tears. Amanda kept asking questions. How long have we been together? Where do I live? What am I doing now? And I couldn't answer any of them convincingly because the answers are all lies. 3 months? A week? Where do I live? Your guest room. What am I doing? Taking your charity while pretending to be someone I'm not. That's not. And then she leaned in, Grace's voice dropped to a cruel mimicry, and she said, "You know, I saw someone who looked just like you last month. On the street near Carnegie Hall. Sitting on a corner. I almost stopped to say hello, but I thought no, couldn't be Grace Holloway. She wouldn't be," and then she stopped. Smiled that awful smile. And said, "But I guess we all fall on hard times, don't we?" Daniel felt rage flood through him. She said that to you? She didn't have to say more. The implication was clear. She knows, Daniel. She knows what I am. And by tomorrow, everyone at this wedding will know. They'll all know that Daniel Pierce was so desperate to save face at his ex's wedding that he brought a homeless woman as his date. They'll laugh about it. Poor Daniel, so pathetic he had to rent a girlfriend. And poor Grace, so desperate she accepted. I don't care what they think. You should. Because this isn't just about you. This is about me too. My dignity. My reputation. What's left of it? Grace swiped at her tears angrily. I thought I could do this. Thought I could walk back into this world and pretend I belonged. But I don't belong, Daniel. I never did. I was kidding myself. You belong. With me. You belong with me. No, I don't. Grace's voice rose, raw and broken. I don't belong anywhere. I'm a failure, Daniel. A mother who couldn't save her daughter. A musician who can't play. A woman who's so broken she ended up sleeping on streets while people like Amanda Westbrook walked past and pretended not to see. And now I'm here, in this beautiful dress at this beautiful wedding, pretending to be someone who matters to someone like you, and it's all a lie. All of it. It's not a lie. Nothing about us is a lie. Isn't it? Grace looked at him, and her expression was full of pain. You brought me here to prove something to your ex. To show her you'd moved on. That you were happy. That you could be present for someone. But Daniel, I was never real to you. I was just convenient. A project. Someone broken enough that helping me would prove you were capable of showing up. That's not true. Then what am I? Really? Tell me, Daniel. What am I to you? The question hung between them, desperate and essential. Daniel opened his mouth and found he didn't have an answer. Not one that was honest. Not one that wouldn't terrify them both. Because the truth was complicated. Messy. The truth was that yes, initially, he brought Grace to prove something. To use her as evidence that he'd changed. But somewhere between that street corner and this beach, she'd become more than that. She'd become someone he cared about. Someone he couldn't imagine losing. Someone he might be falling in love with. But saying that out loud, now like this when she was already devastated, felt like manipulation. Felt like exactly the kind of thing she was accusing him of. Using her emotions against her. His silence was the worst possible answer. Grace's face crumpled. That's what I thought. Grace, no. I do care about you. You feel sorry for me. You wanted to fix me. To prove you could show up for someone in a way you couldn't for Vanessa. That's not care, Daniel. That's guilt. And I've been a fool to think it was anything more. You're not a fool. And I don't feel sorry for you. I feel, Daniel struggled for words. I feel like I've been sleepwalking for 16 months and you woke me up. I feel like for the first time in forever, I'm actually present in my own life. You did that, Grace. Just by being honest. By being real. By refusing to let me hide behind my walls. Those are pretty words, Grace said, and her voice was hollow. But they don't change what I am. What we are. A transaction that got out of hand. Two broken people who mistook desperation for connection. That's not what this is. Then what is it, Daniel? Really? Strip away all the pretty speeches and the grand gestures. What are we? Daniel stopped, his mind racing. We're two people who found each other when we both needed someone. Who showed up for each other. Who are pretending, Grace finished. We're pretending this matters. Pretending we could have a future. Pretending I'm not a homeless woman and you're not a millionaire with control issues and somehow that gap doesn't matter. But it does, Daniel. It matters so much. It doesn't have to. Yes, it does. Grace's voice broke. Because tomorrow I wake up and I'm still broken. Still grieving. Still unable to play the violin. Still the woman who lost everything. And you wake up in your penthouse with your successful company and your perfect life, and you'll realize that helping me was a nice idea, but actually doing it is too hard. Too messy. Too much work. You don't know that. I do know that. Because it's what everyone does. Everyone leaves. My ex left. My friends left. The music world left. Even my own daughter left me, Daniel, and I couldn't stop it. Everyone leaves eventually, and I'm tired of believing they won't. I'm tired of hope. I'm tired of pretending I deserve something better when this, she gestured at the beach, the wedding, everything, is proof that I don't. The devastation in her voice was complete, total, the sound of someone who'd finally broken under the weight of too much loss. Daniel moved toward her, but Grace held up a hand. Don't. Please don't make this harder. Make what harder? This. Us. Whatever we've been doing. Grace took a shaky breath. I need to leave. I need to go back to the hotel, get my things, and leave. Grace, no. Don't do this. I have to. Because if I stay, I'll start hoping again. And hope is what destroys me. Hope makes me believe in things that aren't real. Hope made me think I could have this. A life that doesn't hurt. But I can't, Daniel. I can't. Yes, you can. We can figure this out. Together. We're not together. The words came out as a shout, raw and final. We've never been together. We've been playing pretend. And now reality is here and I can't pretend anymore. I can't stand in that room knowing Amanda Westbrook and everyone else is looking at me and seeing exactly what I am. Charity. Pity. Poor Daniel's broken project. You're not a project. Then what am I? Grace demanded again. Tell me right now, honestly, what I am to you. And don't you dare say my person, or give me some vague platitude. Tell me the truth. Daniel looked at her, this woman he'd known for a week, this woman who'd somehow become essential, and tried to find words for feelings he barely understood himself. You're someone I care about, he said carefully. Someone who makes me want to be better. Someone you feel responsible for, Grace finished. Someone you're trying to save because saving me makes you feel less guilty about failing Vanessa. That's what I am, Daniel. A do-over. A second chance to prove you're capable of showing up. But I'm not her. I'm not your redemption. I'm just a broken woman who made a deal with you for money and then stupidly started believing it meant something more. It does mean something more. Prove it. Grace's voice was a challenge. Prove it, Daniel. Tell me you love me. Tell me this isn't about guilt or responsibility or proving something. Tell me I'm not just convenient trauma for you to process your own issues through. Tell me you actually see me, Grace Holloway, not the project or the charity case or the woman who makes you feel like a good person. Tell me you see me and want me anyway, broken parts and all. The demand hung in the air between them, and Daniel felt paralyzed. Because he did see her. Did care about her. Was absolutely terrified by how much she'd come to matter in just 1 week. But love? Could he say that honestly? Could he promise her something that huge when they'd known each other for 7 days? When their entire relationship had been built on a transaction that had somehow morphed into something else? His hesitation said everything. Grace nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. That's what I thought. Grace, I need time. I need to figure out what I'm feeling. A week ago you were a stranger. Now you're everything. But I can't just say the words because you need to hear them. That's not fair to either of us. You're right, Grace said, her voice going flat. It's not fair. None of this is fair. Which is why I'm leaving. She picked up her violin case and started walking up the beach toward the hotel. Daniel followed. Where are you going? Away. Back to the city. Back to my life. Back to reality. Let me take you. Let me drive you. At least let me. No. Grace stopped and turned, and her expression was final. I need to do this alone. I need to remember how to survive without depending on someone else. Without hoping for rescue. I need to be invisible again because at least when I'm invisible, no one can see me fall apart. Grace, please. Don't do this. Don't run. I'm not running. I'm surviving. There's a difference. She looked at him one last time, and Daniel saw everything in her eyes. Pain, betrayal, the death of hope. Thank you for the week. For the money. For showing me what it felt like to be seen again, even if it was just pretend. But this is where it ends. This is where we both go back to our real lives and forget this ever happened. I can't forget this. I can't forget you. You will, Grace said softly. Everyone does. And then she walked away. Daniel stood on the beach, watching her disappear into the darkness beyond the wedding lights, and felt something inside him crack completely. He'd done exactly what Vanessa had accused him of. He'd been absent. Not physically this time, but emotionally. When Grace had needed him to be brave enough to name what they had, to claim her fully and honestly, he'd hesitated. He'd failed her. Just like he'd failed Vanessa. Behind him, the wedding celebration continued, music and laughter and people toasting to love and forever. Daniel turned to look at it all, at the happiness he'd thought he was ready to witness, and realized the bitter truth. He'd come to this wedding to prove he could show up. To prove he'd changed. But when it mattered most, when Grace had needed him to actually be present and vulnerable and brave, he'd frozen. He'd learned nothing. He was still the same person Vanessa had left, emotionally unavailable, afraid of commitment, unable to choose someone fully and without reservation. Have you ever hesitated at the moment that mattered most and watched something precious slip away? Tell us in the comments, because sometimes our silence speaks louder than our words. Daniel sank onto the sand, still in his expensive suit, and let the weight of his failure crash over him. Grace was gone. And he had no idea how to get her back. Or if he even deserved to try. Back at the hotel, Grace made it to the room before the tears completely overtook her. She'd held it together through the walk from the beach, through the hotel lobby, through the elevator ride. But the moment she closed the door behind her, she collapsed. The sobs came from somewhere deep, somewhere primal, the place where all her losses lived. Lily. David. Her music. Her home. And now Daniel. Now the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, she could have something good again. All of it gone. She'd been a fool to believe. A fool to hope. A fool to think that a week of playing pretend could somehow become real. Grace pulled off the midnight blue dress, the beautiful lie she'd worn, and changed back into her own clothes. The worn jeans. The thin jacket. The costume of invisibility she'd worn for 2 years. This was who she really was. Not the woman in the beautiful dress at the Hamptons' wedding. Not the woman on Daniel Pierce's arm. Just Grace. Broken, homeless, alone. She packed her few belongings quickly. The envelope with $2,500 sat on the nightstand, the first half of their deal. The payment for services rendered. For pretending to be something she wasn't. Grace left it there. Taking it felt like accepting that this had all been a transaction. That nothing between them had been real. And even though her logical brain knew that was true, her heart couldn't bear to reduce the past week to a dollar amount. The violin case sat on the bed, and Grace stared at it for a long moment. She should leave it too. Leave everything behind. Start completely fresh. But she couldn't. Because as broken as she was, as much as she wanted to disappear completely, she couldn't let go of Lily. Couldn't abandon the last piece of her daughter she had left. Grace picked up the case and walked out of the hotel room. She had enough money for a bus ticket back to the city. Enough for a few nights in a shelter. Enough to survive for a little while longer. And that's all she needed. Survival. Not hope. Not love. Not the dangerous, devastating belief that she deserved anything more than the simple act of continuing to breathe. She'd survived losing Lily. She'd survived losing everything. She'd survived losing Daniel too. Even if, right now, it felt impossible. Even if, right now, her heart felt like it was breaking all over again. At the wedding, Daniel returned to the reception in time for the final dances, the last toasts, the end of the celebration. Claire found him at the bar, took one look at his face, and said, "Oh Daniel. What happened?" She left. Left? Left where? Just left. Back to the city. Back to her life. Away from me. Why? What did you do? Daniel laughed bitterly. I hesitated. She asked me what she meant to me, and I hesitated. And that was enough. Claire put her hand on his arm. Go after her. She doesn't want me to. Since when have you listened to what people want? You're Daniel Pierce. You charge in. You make things happen. If she matters to you, go after her. What if I'm wrong? What if she's right and this was all just me using her to process my guilt over Vanessa? What if I don't actually know what I feel? Do you think about her? Constantly. Does she make you want to be better? Every day. Does the idea of never seeing her again feel like losing something essential? Daniel closed his eyes. Yes. Then you know what you feel. You're just scared to name it because naming it makes it real and real things can hurt you. But Daniel? Not naming it, letting her walk away because you're afraid, that's going to hurt more. Trust me. Daniel looked at his sister, and something shifted in his chest. She was right. He was scared. Terrified, actually. Because Grace mattered in a way no one had mattered in years, maybe ever. And admitting that, claiming it, meant risking the kind of pain he'd spent 16 months trying to avoid. But the alternative was worse. The alternative was letting her disappear back into the city, back into invisibility, back into the belief that she didn't deserve to be seen. The alternative was living the rest of his life knowing he'd had a chance at something real and he'd been too afraid to take it. I have to go, Daniel said suddenly. Go where? After her. I have to find her. I have to, he stopped, pulled out his phone, called the driver. I have to tell her the truth. That I'm falling in love with her. That she's not a project or a do-over or convenient trauma. That she's Grace, and she matters, and I'm terrified and I have no idea what I'm doing but I want to try. I want to show up. Really show up. For her. With her. Claire smiled. That's the most honest thing I've heard you say in 2 years. Go. Find her. Fix this. Daniel was already moving toward the exit. Behind him, Vanessa's wedding continued, the celebration of a love he'd never had with her, never would have had. But he wasn't thinking about that anymore. He was thinking about Grace. Grace on that street corner, holding onto her violin. Grace in his kitchen, making him grilled cheese. Grace crying at 2 a.m. about Lily. Grace in the midnight blue dress, terrified but brave. Grace asking him to prove she mattered. And him failing to find the words. He had to find her. Had to make this right. Had to prove that he was capable of showing up when it actually mattered. Even if it was terrifying. Even if he had no idea what came next. Even if loving someone this broken, this complicated, this real meant risking the kind of pain he'd spent years avoiding. He had to try. Because Grace was right about one thing, everyone had left her. But he wouldn't. Not if he could help it. Not without a fight. The drive back to Manhattan felt endless. Daniel sat in the back seat of the town car, phone pressed to his ear, calling Grace's number for the 15th time. It went straight to voicemail. Again. Grace, it's me. Again. Please call me back. Please just let me know you're safe. I don't care if you're angry. I don't care if you never want to see me again. Just please let me know you're okay. He hung up and immediately tried again. Same result. His driver, Marcus, different Marcus, kind Marcus, not the one who'd married his ex, glanced in the rearview mirror. Sir, we're about 40 minutes out. Do you have an address where she might be? That was the problem. Daniel had no idea where Grace would go. She had no apartment. No permanent address. She'd been living on the streets before he found her, and he'd been so focused on the wedding, on his own needs, that he'd never asked her specifics. Where did she sleep? Which shelters did she use? Which corners, which streets, which invisible spaces had been her home? He knew nothing. After a week of talking, of sharing, of what he'd thought was real connection, he realized he'd never asked the most basic question. Where would you go if you needed to disappear? I don't know, Daniel admitted. Just take me to the city. Midtown. Near where I found her. It was a starting point. Not much of one, but something. The drive gave him too much time to think. Too much time to replay the beach conversation, to hear Grace's voice breaking as she asked him to prove she mattered. Tell me you love me. Tell me this isn't about guilt or responsibility or proving something. And he'd frozen. Like a coward. Like exactly the person Vanessa had left. His phone buzzed. For a moment, hope flared, but it was just his mother. Daniel, where did you go? You left the wedding without saying goodbye. Are you all right? No, Mom. I'm not all right. Grace left. She's gone and I don't know where she is and his voice cracked. I messed up. I messed up so badly. Margaret was quiet for a moment. What happened? Daniel told her everything, Amanda's cruelty, Grace's devastation, the question he couldn't answer, his hesitation that said more than any words could have. When he finished, his mother sighed. Oh, Daniel. I know. I'm an idiot. You're not an idiot. You're scared. There's a difference. Scared doesn't matter. She needed me to be brave and I wasn't. So be brave now. Find her. Tell her what you should have said on that beach. What if she won't listen? What if I'm too late? Then you're too late. But at least you tried. At least you showed up. Margaret's voice softened. Daniel, do you love her? Really love her? The question hung in the air, demanding honesty. I think so, Daniel said quietly. I know it's only been a week. I know it's fast and probably crazy and she's right that we barely know each other. But Mom, when I'm with her, I'm present. I'm actually there. I care about what she thinks and feels and needs. I want to know everything about her. I want to help her heal. I want to watch her play violin again. He stopped, overwhelmed. I want her in my life. Not as a project. Not as proof that I've changed. Just as her. Grace. That's enough. She's enough. Then you tell her that. Exactly that. No hesitation. No qualifications. Just the truth. What if it's not enough? It might not be. But Daniel, love is always a risk. Always a choice to be vulnerable even when it terrifies you. Your father and I almost didn't make it through our first year because he was too afraid to tell me he loved me. Thought love made him weak. Thought showing emotion was failure. One night I packed a bag and told him I was leaving. You know what he did. What? He cried. Fully broke down and told me he was terrified of losing me, but more terrified of admitting how much I mattered. That if he loved me and lost me, it would destroy him. And I told him that's exactly what love is, choosing to be destroyed if necessary. Choosing someone even when it scares you. Daniel felt tears prick his eyes. I didn't know that. Because we don't talk about the hard parts. We just show you the after, the 40 years of marriage, the stability, the happy ending. But we don't tell you about the night your father had to choose between safety and love. He chose love. And it was the scariest, best decision of his life. I'm terrified, Mom. Good. That means it matters. Now go find your girl and tell her so. Meanwhile, across the city, Grace sat in a 24-hour diner in Hell's Kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee she couldn't afford and trying to figure out her next move. The bus ride back to Manhattan had been numbingly anonymous, just another invisible person among the late-night travelers. She'd gotten off at Port Authority and walked, letting muscle memory guide her to familiar streets, familiar corners. Back to the world she'd tried to leave behind. The diner was one she'd frequented during her first months on the street, back when she still had a few dollars for coffee, back when she tried to maintain some semblance of routine. The night manager recognized her, gave her a sympathetic nod, didn't rush her to order food. Small mercies. Grace stared at her reflection in the dark window and tried to recognize herself. 1 week ago, she'd been invisible. Broken but stable in her brokenness. She'd known who she was, a grieving mother, a failed musician, a woman who'd given up on hope because hope was too dangerous. Then Daniel Pierce had appeared with his ridiculous offer and his sad eyes, and somehow, impossibly, she'd started hoping again. Started believing she could be more than her grief. Started imagining a future that included warmth and safety and someone who actually saw her. And now she was back where she started, except worse. Because now she knew what she was missing. Knew what it felt like to sleep in a real bed, to eat food she didn't have to beg for, to have someone look at her like she mattered. The knowing made the losing unbearable. Her phone, Daniel's phone really, the one he'd insisted she take for safety, sat on the table, dark and silent. She turned it off after the third call, unable to hear his voice, unable to face his apologies or explanations or whatever he wanted to say. What was there to say? She'd asked him to prove she mattered, and he couldn't. That was answer enough. More coffee, hon? The waitress appeared, pot in hand. Grace shook her head. I should probably go. I don't have money for. It's on the house. You look like you need it. The kindness made Grace's eyes burn with tears. Thank you. After the waitress left, Grace pulled out the crumpled brochure she'd picked up from a community board at Port Authority. New Horizons Women's Shelter, safe haven for women in crisis. Crisis. That was one word for it. The shelter had a program, job training, counseling, temporary housing for up to 3 months. It was a starting point. A way to climb out of the hole she'd fallen into 2 years ago. She could do this. She'd survived losing Lily. She'd survived homelessness. She could survive losing Daniel too. Even if right now, it felt like losing Lily all over again. That same hollow ache. That same sense of something essential being ripped away. That same question that haunted her every morning for 2 years. How do I keep breathing when breathing hurts? Grace pulled out her violin case and opened it for the first time since the hotel. The instrument gleamed in the harsh diner light, familiar and foreign. She touched the strings gently, not pressing down, just feeling them under her fingertips. Lily used to say the violin had magic in it. That when Mommy played, the music made pictures in the air that only special people could see. Grace closed her eyes and tried to imagine what Lily would say if she could see her now. Would she be disappointed? Proud that Grace had survived? Sad that surviving was all Grace seemed capable of? Play something, a voice said. Grace looked up. An elderly man in a worn jacket sat 2 booths over, watching her with kind eyes. I don't play anymore, Grace said automatically. Why not? I lost someone. Playing reminds me of what I lost. The old man nodded slowly. I lost my wife 3 years ago. 52 years together. For a long time, I couldn't listen to music. She loved music. Every song reminded me she was gone. He paused. But one day, I heard our song playing in a store. And instead of pain, I felt her. Like she was there, in the music. Like she'd never really left. Grace felt tears spill over. What if I play and she's not there? What if it's just empty? Then it's empty. But what if it's not? What if she's been waiting for you to play again? What if the music is how she's still with you? The idea was too much. Too painful. Too close to the hope Grace had sworn off. But something in her chest cracked open. What if Lily wasn't in the grief? What if she was in the music? What if Grace had been looking for her daughter in all the wrong places? Grace's hands shook as she lifted the violin out of its case. She didn't pick up the bow. Wasn't ready for that. But she held the instrument against her shoulder, feeling its familiar weight, and something in her that had been frozen for 2 years began impossibly to thaw. That's a start, the old man said gently. That's always where you start. Just holding on. Back on the streets. Daniel had the driver drop him at the corner where he'd first met Grace, 7th Avenue near the closed Carnegie Deli. It was after midnight now, the streets less crowded but still alive with the city's restless energy. Daniel stood on the exact spot where Grace had been sitting a week ago, and tried to think like someone invisible. Where would she go? He started walking, checking every doorway, every corner, every shadowed space where someone might seek shelter. He asked the few homeless people he encountered if they'd seen a woman with a violin. Most ignored him. A few said no. One told him to fuck off. He kept searching. Hours passed. Daniel's expensive shoes rubbed blisters on his heels. His suit jacket couldn't keep out the October cold. His phone battery was dying. He didn't care. He walked from Midtown to Chelsea to Hell's Kitchen, checking shelters, asking questions, showing Grace's photo to anyone who would look. Most people had nothing to offer. But near a church in Hell's Kitchen, a shelter volunteer stopped him. The woman with the violin? I think I saw her earlier. Heading east. Toward the diner on 9th. Daniel's heart lurched. Which diner? Pete's. 24-hour place. She used to come in sometimes, back before she disappeared. Daniel was already running. At the diner. Grace was still sitting in the booth, violin now resting on the table beside her, when the door chimed. She didn't look up at first. Didn't register the new customer until his voice, breathless and desperate, said her name. Grace. Her head snapped up. Daniel stood in the doorway of the diner, looking completely destroyed. His suit was rumpled, his hair a mess, his eyes red-rimmed and wild. He looked like he'd been searching for hours. Which, she realized, he probably had been. Daniel. Her voice came out as a whisper. What are you doing here? Looking for you. I've been looking everywhere. I went to every corner, every shelter, I asked everyone. He moved closer, and she saw he was shaking. Grace, please. Please let me explain. There's nothing to explain. You hesitated. That told me everything I needed to know. It told you I'm a coward. Which is true. But it didn't tell you why. Grace looked away. I don't want to hear your reasons. I don't want explanations or apologies. I just want. I love you. The words landed like a bomb. Grace's eyes snapped back to his face. What? I love you, Daniel repeated, and his voice was shaking but certain. I'm in love with you. And I should have said it on that beach. I should have said it the moment you asked. But I was terrified, Grace. Terrified because I've known you for a week and I'm not supposed to feel this much this fast. Terrified because loving you means risking the kind of pain I've spent 16 months avoiding. Terrified because you're right, you are broken. So am I. And loving someone broken when you're broken yourself is the scariest thing I've ever faced. Grace just stared at him, unable to process the words. But I'm done being scared, Daniel continued. I'm done letting fear write my story. You asked me what you are to me, and I couldn't answer because the truth terrified me. But here's the truth, you're the person who made me feel alive again. You're the reason I know I'm capable of being present, of showing up, of actually caring about someone more than I care about protecting myself. You're not a project or a do-over or proof that I've changed. You're Grace. And that's enough. You're enough. Tears were streaming down Grace's face now. Daniel. I know it's been a week. I know that's crazy. I know we barely know each other and we're both disasters and there are 1,000 reasons why this won't work. But Grace, I want to try. I want to know everything about you. I want to help you find your way back to music. I want to be there when you play again. I want to watch you heal. I want to heal with you. I want whatever we can build together, messy and complicated and real. You can't just say these things, Grace choked out. You can't just show up and say you love me and expect. I'm not expecting anything. I'm just telling you the truth. I love you. And if you don't feel the same way, if I'm too late, if you can't forgive me for hesitating, I'll accept that. But I needed you to know. I needed you to hear me say it without hesitation. Without fear. Just the truth. Grace wiped at her face with shaking hands. This is crazy. Completely crazy. We've known each other for a week. I know. I'm homeless. Broken. I can't even play my violin. I know. You're a millionaire CEO with control issues and emotional unavailability problems. Also true. This is the worst idea ever. Probably. Grace looked at him, really looked at him. At the man who'd stumbled into her life a week ago with a ridiculous offer. The man who'd given her a place to stay and made her grilled cheese and held her while she cried about Lily. The man who'd taken her to his ex's wedding and never once made her feel like charity. The man who'd spent hours searching the city streets for her. The man who was looking at her right now like she was the most important thing in his world. I'm terrified, Grace whispered. Me too. I'm going to hurt you. My grief is going to hurt you. Then it hurts me. We'll figure it out. I might never be whole. I might always be this broken. Then we're broken together. That's okay. Daniel. Grace's voice cracked. I can't promise you anything. I can't promise I won't run again. I can't promise I'll get better. I can't even promise I'll ever play violin again. All I can promise is that I'm scared and I'm here and she stopped, the words catching in her throat. You what? Daniel asked softly. Grace took a shaky breath. I think I might love you too. Which is insane. Which is the last thing I should feel. Which terrifies me more than anything has terrified me since losing Lily. But Daniel, when you held me while I cried, when you defended me to your mother, when you looked at me like I was visible, I felt something. Something I thought I'd never feel again. Hope. Dangerous, stupid, devastating hope that maybe I deserve something good. That maybe broken people can find each other and build something real. Daniel moved to her booth, sliding in beside her. He took her hands in his, cold and shaking, meeting warm and steady. We can build something, he said. Maybe not perfect. Maybe not what either of us imagined. But something real. Something that matters. Will you try? With me? Grace looked at their joined hands. At the violin on the table, Lily's favorite thing. At this man who'd crashed into her life and refused to let her stay invisible. She thought about the old man's words. What if she's been waiting for you to play again? What if the music is how she's still with you? She thought about Lily, who'd loved the violin, who'd said it made pictures in the air, who'd believed magic was real. And Grace made a choice. Not for Daniel. Not even for herself. For Lily. For the little girl who believed her mother could create beauty in the world. For the possibility that maybe, just maybe, creating beauty again was how she'd honor her daughter's memory. Okay, Grace whispered. I'll try. Daniel's face transformed, hope and relief and love so clear it made Grace's chest ache. Yeah. One day at a time. No promises. But I'll try. Daniel pulled her into his arms, and Grace let herself be held. Let herself hope. Let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, broken people could find each other in the darkness and build something that looked like light. They sat in the diner booth as the night deepened outside, two damaged people choosing each other despite every reason not to. Choosing love over safety. Choosing hope over protection. Choosing to be present even when it terrified them. And somewhere, Grace thought, maybe Lily was smiling. Maybe her daughter had sent her this strange, broken man who believed she was worth finding. Maybe this was Grace, not the name, but the concept. The unearned gift. The second chance that arrives when you've given up hope. Maybe this was love. Messy and complicated and terrifying and real. Maybe this was enough. 3 months later, Daniel woke to the sound of music. Not just any music, a violin, playing softly from somewhere in the penthouse. Hesitant notes at first, then gaining confidence, weaving into something that might have been Brahms. Or maybe just Grace finding her way back. He lay in bed for a moment, listening, and felt something expand in his chest. Gratitude, maybe. Or just the simple pleasure of waking up to proof that Grace was still there, still trying, still choosing to stay. The past 3 months hadn't been easy. There had been setbacks. Days when Grace couldn't get out of bed, swallowed by grief so profound that Daniel could only sit beside her and hold her hand. Days when his own impatience surfaced, when he wanted to fix things faster than healing allowed. Arguments about small things that were really about big things. Trust, independence, whether accepting help was weakness or wisdom. But there had been good days too. Grace had started therapy with Dr. Miriam Chun, a grief specialist who'd survived her own losses. Slowly, painfully, she was learning to carry Lily's memory without letting it crush her. She'd moved from the guest room to Daniel's room 6 weeks ago, a transition that had been terrifying for both of them. Learning to sleep beside someone, to be vulnerable in unconsciousness, to wake up and choose each other again each morning. She'd started teaching violin to kids at a community center in Brooklyn. Just twice a week at first, then more as her confidence grew. Watching children discover music gave her a way to honor Lily while building something new. And she'd started playing again. Not performing. Not yet. Maybe never. But playing in the privacy of their home, for herself, for Daniel, for the daughter who'd loved watching her mother make magic with strings and wood. Daniel got out of bed and found Grace in the living room, standing by the windows with the morning sun streaming in, her violin tucked against her shoulder. She was playing with her eyes closed, swaying slightly, lost in the music. She didn't hear him approach. He watched from the doorway, this woman who'd been invisible on a street corner 3 months ago, now filling his home with beauty. When she finished the piece, she opened her eyes and saw him. Sorry, she said, lowering the violin. Did I wake you? Don't apologize. That was beautiful. It was sloppy. I kept missing the fingering on the transitions. Grace. Daniel moved closer. It was beautiful. You're beautiful. Stop deflecting. A smile tugged at her lips, that smile he'd learned meant she was fighting the urge to argue but losing. Fine. It was acceptable. Progress. Tiny, microscopic progress. Still progress. Grace set down the violin carefully and moved into his arms. This too had taken time, learning to accept affection without flinching, without waiting for the other shoe to drop, without assuming every touch was the prelude to abandonment. "What are you thinking about?" Daniel asked, feeling her tension. "Today. Tonight. The thing." The thing was dinner with Vanessa and Marcus. 2 weeks ago, Vanessa had reached out, an email that started with apologies and ended with an invitation. She wanted to clear the air, she'd said. To move forward without the weight of their painful history. Marcus had agreed, tentatively hopeful that they could all find some kind of peace. Daniel had been skeptical. Grace had been terrified. But they both agreed to try. "We don't have to go," Daniel said for the 10th time. "We can cancel. Order takeout. Hide in the penthouse like hermits." "No." Grace pulled back to look at him. "We need to do this. You need to do this. Close that chapter properly. Prove to yourself, and to her, that you really have moved on." "I don't need to prove anything to Vanessa." "Then prove it to yourself." Daniel studied her face, the face he'd memorized over 3 months of mornings and midnights. She was healthier now, the gauntness replaced by softness. Her eyes were still shadowed sometimes, grief a permanent resident, but there was light there too. Hope, carefully cultivated. "Are you sure?" he asked. "No. But I'm going anyway. That's what we do now, remember? We do the scary things. Together." That afternoon, Daniel's office. Daniel was reviewing quarterly reports when his assistant Melissa knocked on his door. "Mr. Pierce. There's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's important." "Who?" "Amanda Westbrook." Daniel felt his entire body go rigid. Amanda. The woman who'd recognized Grace at the wedding. Who'd been cruel in that particular way wealthy people perfected, the smile that was really a weapon. "Tell her I'm busy." "She said you'd say that. She said to tell you it's about Grace." Daniel was on his feet immediately. "Send her in." Amanda entered his office like she owned it. Designer suit, perfect hair, the confidence that came from never having to worry about where she'd sleep. She sat without being invited. "Daniel. You look well. Success clearly agrees with you." "What do you want, Amanda?" "Direct." "I appreciate that." She crossed her legs and studied him. "I wanted to apologize. For what I said to Grace at the wedding. It was cruel. Unnecessary. I was drunk and feeling vindictive, and I took it out on someone who didn't deserve it." Daniel kept his voice carefully neutral. "What brought on this sudden attack of conscience?" "I saw her. Last week. At that community center in Brooklyn. She was teaching violin to children. Looked happy. Settled. Like she'd found her way back." Amanda paused. "I did some research after the wedding. Found out what happened to her. About her daughter. About how she ended up on the streets. And I realized I'd been unforgivably cruel to someone who'd survived something I can't imagine." "So you want forgiveness?" "No. I don't deserve that. I want you to tell her I'm sorry. And I want to make a donation. To whatever program helped her get back on her feet. I can't undo what I said, but maybe I can help someone else." Daniel studied her, looking for the trap, the angle, the hidden agenda. He found only guilt. Genuine, uncomfortable guilt. "The New Horizons Women's Shelter," Daniel said finally. "That's where she would have gone if we hadn't," he stopped, unsure how to finish. "If you hadn't fallen in love with her," Amanda finished. "That's the rumor, you know. That Daniel Pierce fell completely embarrassingly in love with a homeless woman he brought to his ex's wedding. Half the city thinks you've lost your mind. The other half thinks it's the most romantic thing they've ever heard. I don't care what the city thinks. I know. That's why it works." Amanda stood. "I'll make the donation. And Daniel? For what it's worth, I'm glad you found her. You seem present. Like you're actually living instead of just existing. That's rare." After she left, Daniel sat at his desk and tried to process the conversation. 3 months ago, Amanda's cruelty had shattered Grace's fragile hope. Had sent her running back into the darkness. Had almost destroyed the best thing that had ever happened to him. Now she was back, apologizing, trying to make amends. People could change. People could choose differently. Even people like Amanda Westbrook. The thought gave him hope for tonight's dinner. That evening, the restaurant. Daniel and Grace arrived at the small Italian place in the West Village that Vanessa had suggested, intimate enough for privacy, public enough to prevent disaster. Grace was wearing a simple black dress, her hair down, minimal makeup. She looked beautiful and terrified. "We can still leave," Daniel said, holding her hand. "Stop offering me escape routes. I'm going in." Brave woman. Foolish woman. There's a difference. They found Vanessa and Marcus already seated at a corner table. Vanessa looked radiant, glowing in that way happily married people did. Marcus looked nervous. "Daniel. Grace. Thank you for coming." Vanessa stood and surprisingly, hugged Daniel. Then, even more surprisingly, she hugged Grace. "It's good to see you both." They settled into their seats, and for a moment, The awkwardness was suffocating. Then Vanessa laughed. Okay, this is weird. Can we all just acknowledge that this is incredibly weird? Despite himself, Daniel smiled. Extremely weird. The weirdest, Grace agreed. Marcus cleared his throat. I've been practicing what to say. But now that we're here, I'm just going to wing it. Daniel, I'm sorry. For how everything happened. For not being honest with you. For letting things develop with Vanessa while we were still business partners. It was wrong. I was wrong. Daniel looked at Marcus, his former friend, the man who'd married his ex, and tried to find anger. He found only tired acceptance. I'm sorry too, Daniel said. For being absent. For not being the partner Vanessa needed. For letting work consume me to the point where I couldn't show up for the people who mattered. You two found something real. I'm glad you did. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. Daniel, I need to say something. What I did, leaving you for Marcus, taking the business, all of it, I've carried so much guilt. I convinced myself you didn't really love me, that it didn't really hurt you, that you'd be fine. But watching you at the wedding with Grace, seeing how you looked at her, she stopped, emotion catching in her throat. I realized what I'd taken from you. The chance to be that present, that open, with someone you actually loved. Vanessa. Daniel reached across the table and took her hand. You didn't take anything from me. I wasn't capable of being that person with you. I'm barely capable of being that person now. But Grace, he looked at the woman beside him. Grace makes me want to try. Makes me want to show up. Not because she demands it, but because I can't imagine not being present for her. Grace squeezed his hand under the table, and Daniel saw tears in her eyes. That's how I feel about Marcus, Vanessa said softly. He sees me. Really sees me. And I see him. That's what love should be. What it always should have been. They sat in that acknowledgement for a moment, for people who'd hurt each other, forgiven each other, and were trying to move forward. So, Marcus said, clearly trying to lighten the mood. Grace, Daniel mentioned you're teaching violin now? And just like that, the conversation shifted. They talked about Grace's students, about Daniel's company, about Vanessa and Marcus's honeymoon in Italy. They shared food and wine and stories, and slowly, impossibly, it stopped being awkward. They weren't friends. Might never be friends. But they weren't enemies either. Just people who'd been part of each other's stories, who'd caused pain and received it, who were choosing to move forward without the weight of bitterness. Sometimes closure isn't dramatic, it's just dinner with people who used to hurt you, choosing grace over grudges. What past relationship do you need to make peace with? Share your story. Healing starts when we stop holding on to what's already gone. As they were leaving, Vanessa pulled Grace aside while Daniel and Marcus settled the bill. I don't know what happened, Vanessa said quietly. I don't know how you two found each other or what your story is. But Grace? Take care of him. He's a good man who spent a long time forgetting how to be present. You reminded him. That's a gift. He saved my life, Grace said simply. Literally and figuratively. I'm the lucky one. I think you're both lucky. And brave. And I'm glad he has you. They hugged again, and this time it felt real. Not friendship, but mutual respect. Shared understanding that love was complicated and people were flawed, and sometimes the best thing you could do was wish someone well and move on. Outside the restaurant, Daniel and Grace walked slowly toward their car, hands linked, the autumn air crisp around them. That wasn't as terrible as I expected, Grace said. Is that your way of saying it went well? I'm saying we survived it without bloodshed. That's a win. Daniel laughed and pulled her closer. How are you? Really? Grace considered the question. I'm okay. Better than okay. Watching you with Vanessa, seeing you be kind and present and mature, it made me proud. Made me think maybe we really can do this. Maybe we really can build something that lasts. Maybe. Okay, probably. Fine, likely. Don't make me commit more than that. They reached the car, but instead of getting in, Daniel turned to face her fully. Grace Holloway, he said, and his voice was serious. 3 months ago, I found you on a street corner and made an impulsive, ridiculous decision to bring you to my ex's wedding. And somehow, impossibly, that terrible idea became the best thing that ever happened to me. Daniel. Let me finish. You've taught me what it means to be present. To show up. To love someone not because they're perfect, but because they're real. You've made me want to be better. Not for you, though I do want to be better for you, but for myself. Because I like who I am when I'm with you. Grace's eyes filled with tears. Where are you going with this? Daniel smiled. Nowhere. I'm just telling you I love you. That I choose you. Every day. Even the hard days. Especially the hard days. I choose you, Grace. Today and tomorrow and every day after that. That's a lot of pressure. Do you choose me? Grace looked at him, this man who'd crashed into her life when she'd given up hope. Who'd seen her at her worst and loved her anyway. Who'd searched the city streets for her. Who held her when she cried and celebrated when she played violin and believed she was worth saving even when she didn't believe it herself. Yes, she said. I choose you. Even though you're emotionally unavailable and have control issues and work too much. I'm working on that. I know. That's why I'm staying. Daniel kissed her then, there on the sidewalk in the West Village, and Grace kissed him back. It wasn't their first kiss, that had happened 2 weeks after the wedding, tentative and terrifying and perfect, but it felt significant. Like a promise. Like a choice they were making consciously, deliberately, together. When they pulled apart, Grace said, "Take me home." The penthouse. No. Home. Wherever we are together. That's home now. 6 months later. The community center in Brooklyn was packed. Grace stood backstage, violin in hand, trying not to panic. This was her first public performance in 3 years. Small, intimate, just a fundraiser for the center's music program, maybe 70 people in folding chairs. But it felt monumental. Terrifying. Like if she failed tonight, she'd prove every fear she'd ever had about herself. "You're going to be amazing," Daniel said, appearing beside her with a cup of water. "You're required to say that. You're biased." "I'm absolutely biased. I'm also right." Grace took the water with shaking hands. "What if I can't do it? What if I get out there and freeze? What if?" "Then you freeze. And we try again another night. Grace, you've already won. You're here. You're playing again. That's the victory. Everything else is just bonus." She looked at him, and felt something settle in her chest. He was right. 6 months ago, she couldn't pick up her violin without breaking down. Now she was about to perform. That was progress. That was healing. That was enough. "I love you," she said. "I love you too. Now go make magic. Your students are waiting." Grace took a deep breath and walked onto the small stage. 70 faces looked up at her. She recognized some, parents of her students, staff from the shelter that had taken her in, Amanda Westbrook in the back row looking uncomfortable but present. And in the front row Daniel, watching her like she was the most important thing in the world. Grace lifted her violin, positioned it against her shoulder, and felt Lily's presence. Not in the grief this time. In the music. In the joy her daughter had felt watching her mother play. In the magic Lily had believed in. Grace closed her eyes, took a breath, and began. She played Brahms' Lullaby, the song she'd played for Lily every night. The song that had been too painful to hear for 3 years. The song that now felt like a bridge between who she'd been and who she was becoming. Her fingers found the notes. Muscle memory took over. And slowly, beautifully, the music filled the room. She didn't play perfectly. She missed transitions, rushed some phrases, her vibrato wavered on the high notes. But she played. She played with everything she had, all her grief and hope and love and loss poured into the strings. She played for Lily. For Daniel. For herself. For every person in that room who'd survived something unsurvivable and kept breathing anyway. When she finished, there was a moment of perfect silence. Then applause erupted. Grace opened her eyes and saw Daniel standing, tears streaming down his face, clapping like she'd just performed at Carnegie Hall. Around him, others stood too, her students, their parents, strangers who'd come to support the center. They were seeing her. Really seeing her. And for the first time in 3 years, Grace didn't want to be invisible. She wanted to be exactly where she was. Present. Seen. Alive. She took a bow, and as she straightened, she caught sight of something that made her breath catch. In the back corner, standing in the shadows, a little girl about 6 years old in a yellow dress with flowers. Grace blinked and the girl was gone. But the feeling remained. "I see you, Mommy. I see you playing. I see your magic." Grace smiled through her tears and lowered her violin. She'd spent 3 years looking for Lily in the grief, in the pain, in the unbearable weight of loss. But Lily had been here all along. In the music. In the beauty. In the love Grace was learning to accept again. Her daughter hadn't left her. She'd just been waiting for Grace to remember how to see. 1 year later. Daniel stood in the kitchen of their new apartment, smaller than the penthouse, warmer, filled with Grace's violin music and the smell of whatever she was attempting to cook. They'd moved in together 6 months ago, leaving the penthouse with its pristine emptiness for something that felt more like a home. Grace had her own music room. Daniel had an office where he actually left work at work. They had space for Grace's students who sometimes came over for lessons. They had a life. "Daniel." Grace called from the other room. "Come here. Quick." He found her in the music room, laptop open, staring at the screen with wide eyes. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Look." She turned the laptop toward him. It was an email from the director of a documentary series called Voices of Resilience, stories of people who'd survived loss and found their way back. They wanted to feature Grace. "They want to tell my story," Grace said, her voice shaking. "About Lily. About being homeless. About the violin. About finding my way back." "That's amazing. Are you going to do it?" Grace was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know. It means being public about everything. About the worst things that ever happened to me. About us. About how we met." The truth. The whole truth. That you picked me up off the street. That we started as a transaction. That I was homeless and broken and she stopped. And I fell in love with you anyway, Daniel finished. Grace, if you want to tell that story, tell it. If you don't. But don't hide because you're ashamed. There's nothing shameful about surviving. Nothing shameful about accepting help. Nothing shameful about being human. Grace looked at him, and he saw her wavering. Saw the fear of being exposed fighting against the desire to help others who might be where she'd been. What if people judge us? They will. What if they say terrible things? They probably will. What if? Grace. Daniel moved closer, taking her hands. What if your story helps one person? One woman sleeping on the street who thinks there's no way back? One grieving mother who thinks she'll never heal? One person who needs to know that broken people can find each other and build something beautiful? Would that be worth it? Tears spilled down Grace's cheeks. Yes. Then do it. Tell your story. Our story. Let people judge. Let them say what they want. We know the truth. We lived it. And I'm proud of us. Proud of you. Proud of how far we've come. Grace nodded slowly, then looked back at the email. Okay. I'll do it. Yeah. For Lily. For the woman I was a year ago who thought there was no hope. For everyone still sitting on that corner thinking they're invisible. I'll tell them they're not. That someone sees them. That there's a way back. Daniel pulled her into his arms, and they stood in the music room surrounded by proof of Grace's healing. Sheet music on stands, her violin resting in its open case, photos of her students on the walls. I'm proud of you, he whispered into her hair. I'm proud of us, Grace replied. And she meant it. 1 year ago, she'd been invisible. Broken. Convinced she'd lost everything worth having. Now she had a home. A partner. Students who looked at her like she was magic. Music flowing through her fingers again. Lily's memory transformed from unbearable pain to bittersweet gift. She had a life. Not the life she'd planned. Not the life she'd had before. But a life that was hers, built piece by piece from rubble and hope. Daniel had been right that first night, though neither of them had known it then. They weren't broken. They were healing. And healing, Grace had learned, wasn't about going back to who you were before. It was about building something new from the pieces that remained. It was about letting people see you. All of you. Even the damaged parts. It was about playing the lullaby even when it hurt, because the music was where your daughter lived now. It was about accepting love from unexpected places and giving it back without reservation. It was about showing up. Being present. Choosing each other, again and again, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. That night, as they lay in bed, Grace said, Daniel. Thank you. For what? For seeing me. That first night. When I was invisible to everyone else. You saw me. Daniel pulled her closer. You were never invisible, Grace. You were just waiting for someone to look. I'm glad it was you. Me too. They fell asleep like that, tangled together, two people who'd been lost and found each other in the darkness. Outside, the city continued its restless dance. But inside, in their small apartment filled with music and love and hard-won hope, Grace and Daniel had found something rare. A second chance. A new beginning. A home. And for two people who'd thought they'd lost everything, that was more than enough. It was everything. 2 years later. The documentary premiered to critical acclaim. Grace's story, their story, touched millions. The calls came flooding in. Donations to homeless shelters. Women reaching out to say they'd been inspired to try again. Other musicians who'd lost their way and were finding it back. Grace became an advocate for homeless women and grief counseling. She spoke at conferences, performed at fundraisers, taught masterclasses. Daniel stepped back from his company, promoting others to leadership roles so he could be present for what mattered. He and Grace traveled less for work and more for life, finding music festivals and quiet beaches and moments of simple joy. They never married. Not because they didn't love each other, but because Grace said marriage felt like making promises to the future when all they could really promise was the present. So they promised the present to each other. Every morning, they woke up and chose each other again. That was enough. More than enough. On the 3rd anniversary of the day they met, Daniel took Grace back to that corner near Carnegie Hall. Why are we here? Grace asked. Because 3 years ago, I walked past this corner and made the most impulsive, ridiculous decision of my life. And I wanted to remember it. Honor it. Say thank you to whatever force in the universe put me on this street at exactly the right moment. Grace looked at the corner, just a piece of concrete, nothing special, but also the place where her life had changed. You know what I think about sometimes? Grace said. I think about all the people who walked past me that night. Hundreds of people, and they all looked away. But you didn't. Why? Daniel considered the question. Honestly? I don't know. Maybe because I was drowning too. Maybe because I recognized something in you that I saw in myself. Or maybe, he paused. Maybe some people are just meant to find each other. In the right moment. In the right way. Even if that way makes no logical sense. Grace smiled. You've gotten very philosophical in your old age. I'm 36. Ancient. You love me anyway. I really do. Against all odds and better judgment, I really, really do. They stood on that corner as the city moved around them, and Grace felt Lily's presence. Not sad anymore, just there. A gentle reminder that love doesn't end when life does. It transforms. It lives on in the music, in the memories, in the way we choose to honor those we've lost by living fully in their absence. Ready to go home? Daniel asked. Grace took his hand. Yeah, let's go home. And as they walked away from that corner, that sacred ordinary piece of concrete where everything had changed, Grace thought about how strange life was. How loss could lead to love. How endings could become beginnings. How the worst moment of your life could somehow, impossibly, lead you to the best. How being seen by one person could teach you to see yourself again. How hope, that dangerous, devastating thing, could save you if you were brave enough to let it. She'd lost her daughter. Lost her home. Lost herself. But she'd found music again. Found purpose. Found love. Found Daniel. And in finding him, she'd found her way back to herself. Not the self she'd been before. That Grace was gone, buried with Lily. But this Grace, scarred and strong, broken and healing, grieving and growing, this Grace was enough. This Grace was home. This is a story about two people who were invisible in different ways, one hidden by wealth and success, the other by poverty and grief. They found each other in the worst circumstances and built something beautiful from the rubble of their broken lives. It's about showing up. Being present. Choosing love even when it terrifies you. It's about the fact that healing isn't linear. That broken people can love each other. That hope is dangerous but necessary. Most importantly, it's about grace, both the name and the concept. The unearned gift. The second chance. The radical act of seeing someone and choosing to stay. Final question for you. What would you do if life gave you a second chance when you'd stopped believing in first chances? Drop your thoughts below. Is every ending also a beginning? Do we just have to be brave enough to start again?
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.